Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Batcave. It is, I think it's Tuesday, January 16th, 2023, and I'm going to keep going on this Genesis series for you guys. So we're going to hopefully finish up the book of Genesis today and going to kind of walk you through Jacob and Joseph's journey and bringing them into Egypt. That's going to start with Genesis 37, where it says, "And Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob." So if you guys remember from the last video, Jacob had settled up near Shechem, which is going to be kind of in the region north of the Dead Sea. On both sides of that, he's apparently got herds set up there, and then on the other side, he's interfacing with a town there where he's trading. And then they end up getting into a situation with his daughter getting raped, and it doesn't really say she got raped. She got seduced, it seems like. And then his sons kill everyone in the town, so they end up taking the whole city basically hostage. They basically kidnap them as servants or whatever. So you have Jacob ending up with a tribe probably. You know, I would assume he's got at least 100 people between his sons and the people he's taken. It doesn't look like any of his sons have reached marrying age yet. Again, marrying age is still going to be probably upstairs of 30. And most of his boys are probably in their 20s when they did that, the older ones. So, and he's going to go move down with his father. He's going to basically eventually bury his father. I think he lives with his father a good I want to say it's actually a good 20 years before his father dies, if I've got my math right. So his father lives to be 180. It might be longer than that. It might actually be 50 years. Let me do that math real quick. So Jacob's going to live with his father in Hebron for about 50 years. And when you get to the story of Joseph, they're going to go back to when they were living in Shechem. So that's why you want to be careful when you're marking the narrative of Genesis. It's not a straightforward narrative, okay? So because these stories are the life of Isaac, the life of Jacob, the generations of Jacob, once you start now at the generations of Jacob, it's going to take you back to when they were in Shechem. Remember, he's got booths set up at Succoth, which is, I'm going to show you where these are. These are on, Succoth is over here. So you're going to be north of the Dead Sea, south of the Sea of Galilee, okay? And you're going to have the Jordan River here, and Succoth is going to be where his booths are set up for his cattle. And then he's going to do most of his trading around here. So we're going to see when the story of Joseph happens, he's somewhere between here, and his boys are running their herds around Shechem. Okay, and that's when they sell Joseph into slavery. So Joseph is born before he leaves Syria, and Joseph is probably going to be a teenager around this time. Then he's going to go after the incident with his boys in Shechem when they kill everyone in the city. They're going to go to the south to Hebron right here, and he's going to live here for 50 years until his dad dies. And the difference between his dad dying and him, remember, Isaac is going to live to be, I think, 187. He's pretty old before he dies. So I'm sorry, Isaac lives to be 180, and Jacob lives to be 147. So you've got a difference of 33 years between the two of them, but Isaac was 60 when he has Jacob. So Isaac's actually going to die after Joseph has already been sold into Egypt, and then Jacob's going to go on to live, I think, 23 years after that. And so 17 of those years are going to be in Egypt. So Isaac is going to die somewhere around like 6 years before Jacob actually goes into Egypt, if that makes sense, okay? So that's why it's going to take you to the end of Isaac's life, and this next narrative is going to say, now these are the generations Esau who is Edom. Now, before I jump into this story, I want to just kind of walk you guys through where they're at in terms of history and supply chain and technology. So, if you want to get a feel for the era that they're in the Bronze Age, okay? And the Bronze Age, I've been researching that, and it's actually pretty simple, okay? Now, we know Genesis 4 talks about Lamech's son Tubal-Cain working in bronze and iron and all kinds of metals. So most of what we know about common metallurgy, and I mean that's going to be your copper, your tin, your bronze, your brass, your iron. That's most of what is commonly used in metallurgy. Obviously, we've done advanced stuff in the modern era. All that was around before the flood. So when you think Bronze Age, if you're like a young history student or high school, college, whatever, don't think like they're just inventing bronze for the first time. It's called the Bronze Age because we find bronze all over the place. And the reason why we have bronze all over the place is because it's a lot easier to make than iron. With iron, you need like 2300 degrees melting point to make it, which means you're going to have a city with like a non-stop foundry going, and you have to have a concerted effort that you can afford with tons of fuel and stuff like that going into creating this heat source so that you can make iron. So you need to have a certain level of advanced civilization plus access to mines and the stuff that you need before you can actually even make iron. So it's just not as common. It's not that nobody has it. They have it before the flood, okay? Bronze, you need a melting point, which is roughly the same as what you need to make pottery. You can literally get to that temperature in a pottery kiln, which means every little village site that has pottery making is going to be able to make bronze. You need copper and tin. When we look at world history now, okay, what you probably have happened before the flood is you probably have like about 1,000 years of pretty rudimentary technologies. Okay, remember these are human beings starting from nothing, and by the time you get to Tubal-Cain's generation, they're working in iron and bronze and stuff. So they're probably closer to what we would think of as like Native American technology before then, okay? They probably knew how to make stuff with stone. And then Tubal-Cain, basically he's kind of a genius, and so he's figuring out the metals, okay? He's got a gift for metal or whatever, and he figures out all the metals. Well, you got to remember, these guys are living to be 900 years old, so somewhere around the course of this 900-year life this guy has, he starts working in metal, and that's when we start finding the earliest bronze and iron artifacts. Okay, we've actually found iron artifacts from before the flood, and there's differences in ozones and stuff like that in how we can prove that it was pre-flood. I've seen this on like creationist stuff. Okay, so you have basically all this metallurgy popping up around 500 years before the flood, roughly. Okay, roughly 500 years before the flood. We also have paper popping up. Or I'm sorry. No, we have metallurgy popping up. It's 3,500 BC. The flood would have been around 2,500 BC. So within about 500 years, we've got metallurgy. We have evidence of paper being used in Egypt 500 years before the flood. Okay? So when you think of these guys coming back under Noah, you got to remember, this world was around for 1,600 years. These people were living to be almost 1,000. They knew where everything was. They knew where the climates were that were appropriate for these things. And obviously you're going to have major changes in climate, but you have two things that are really governing your geographical climate conditions. You have topography, and then you have climate itself. You have basically weather patterns. Okay, so weather patterns are probably going to change after the flood. You probably have a shift in the Earth's axis that God probably does to make sure all the seasons are going to be standard, and those seasons are then going to make up for all this additional water that is now in the atmosphere. And so you're going to have, seasons of snow and rains and cold and stuff like that. So it's going to be cyclical, so you don't have all this water on the ground at the same time in the same place. You also probably have an ice age going on. So what they talk about happening after the flood is they talk about how a wind blew across the earth and started clearing the water. Well, that's similar to what happens when God parts the Red Sea. So you probably have something like that going on, and it's pushing the water north and south. And then between just elevation and just changes in atmosphere and stuff like that, and the pole shift, you're going to have that water freezing. And what's going to happen is a combination of that water, basically glacial ice is actually forming, and it's pulling back, and it's forming all the lakes over centuries. And a certain amount of that water is going into the atmosphere and forming the cloud systems and stuff like that. And meanwhile, boots on the ground, you're going to have these parallels, which is, I'm just going to throw this out there, like roughly, you have the, I forget what it's called, but the meridian lines. So these parallel lines probably largely dictated human civilization for a while. But we know like the earliest bronze artifacts we have from, we have, again, we're going to have pre-flood, post-flood bronze artifacts. Cornwall, England is where they're getting this stuff. So what you probably have, if you're getting Noah's descendants, according to the Book of Jubilees, Noah basically separated out the earth, and he basically gives this southern part, I'm going to assume it's going to be Africa, to Ham. The northern part, and he's going to mark out the Dnieper River, so that's the river that splits Ukraine into, is going to be Japheth's, and then the middle between the two is going to be Shem's. Okay, and he pronounces a curse on everybody but who tries to invade across that line. So he's obviously designated parts of the world for people mixing and migrating. But the point is the major divisions between Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which is essentially your Caucasians, your Middle Eastern, and then your African peoples, is going to be basically what's north of Turkey. Between Turkey and the Red Sea is going to be Shem's, and then the continent of Africa is going to be Ham's. Okay, and they can spread out from there, and they can mix and mingle, but they can't take over each other's turf. Okay, so the Middle East is never going to be taken over by white people or Africans. And you find this in history. When they try, they fail. And they fail in a big way. You see Alexander the Great take it over, and he dies immediately, and he goes to warfare. And then the indigenous peoples are essentially there, and they've got limited rule. But those kingdoms just keep falling apart. You find a split and a divide between the Persians and the Romans over this. They never really take it over. It's really the Arabian Peninsula, and everything's between the Fertile Crescent. If you understand this Fertile Crescent area, everything south of there always stays Arab Semitic peoples. And then obviously they're going to push back, and they're going to be around the north here, and they just keep coming back. Okay, so those are the major divisions, and you're going to have, again, probably like an ice age that is rolling this back over the centuries from there. But they seem to know where the tin is. So the tin is kind of rare. Copper's much more abundant. If you look at these copper mines are everywhere. It looks like in the Bronze Age, the peak of the Bronze Age up until its collapse, your major source of copper is going to be right here in Cyprus, which makes me wonder if there's like some etymological link between Cyprus and copper, because they both have CPR in them. Okay, it wouldn't shock me, but there's also Kaftir, which has CPTR in it, and it could be related to that. So there was a time when Egyptians were going to govern Cyprus, Crete, and then the Greek peoples of Tarshish are going to get into Spain and England. And it looks like they beeline for the tin. They know where the tin is, probably because this trade was going on before Noah. So what I imagine happening is you have, again, you probably have like 500 years of just figuring stuff out and, you know, learning what different materials can do and stuff like that. And then you get to the point where they have metal, and that's spreading around, and that's getting to the point where warfare is starting to accumulate. And then you get to the point where they have paper about 500 years before the flood, and then you're getting to probably a knowledge boom like we've had in, you know, recent times. Okay, now I don't know if they got to the point where we've gotten, because we've had, again, they've had 1,600 years, we've had 2,000 years. Well, I'm sorry, we've had 4,000 years, but we've had our languages divided. So they could have gotten everywhere where we are technologically. We don't really have evidence that they did, but you got to remember, like, if people were to find evidence of colonies on Mars, that doesn't mean there's Martians. If people were to find evidence of colonies on the moon, that doesn't mean there's aliens. We could have pulled that off, and then there was no way to maintain the supply chain to it, and it, you know, kind of dissolved and went away. Like, we keep discovering these, you know, ancient civilizations and stuff all over the place. Okay, so that could have happened. I mean, if you're talking about people living to be 1,000 years with one language, and you got 1,600 years of this, they very well could have gotten to, you know, like Native American style, you know, living to rockets and stuff like that. We don't know. Okay, now these guys are basically going to beeline for the tin, and then Cyprus is going to be there, and the core of the Javanite people, so these are the pre-Greek people, are going to be in these island chains right here. Ionia is going to be up in here, and they're going to populate these islands. They're going to populate Cyprus, and they're going to populate Tarshish, which is over here. So they're probably going to populate southern Italy. They're probably going to populate these other islands too and colonize them. And they're going to run a trade route that seems to be getting the tin from here, and then you have the bronze from here, and then you see these dating periods. So you see 3,800 BC, 3,500 BC, 3,000 BC. That's all pre-flood. And so what that can tell you is probably before the flood, this is where most of human civilization was. They probably had colonies and stuff beyond that, but, you know, who knows how big the population was. But it seems like this is where we find a lot of this stuff, okay? And so you had most of these technologies in play, and so we would understand that the pre-flood era was probably at least as technologically advanced as like the classical age, okay? So then we're going to find records of these guys apparently digging stuff up from the pre-flood era. So you probably still had civilizations in some of these places that made sense because a river flows, and they probably just go right back to them once their population grows big enough. Okay, so think about it like this: we know in the pre-flood era they were having kids at around 100 years apiece. Okay. So that's why the population might not be quite as big, okay? Because they're having kids essentially. They're living a lot longer, but they're having kids probably 100 years apart. Where in that post-flood era, they're going to start having kids around 30, and then they're going to start having kids. It looks like they're probably between 5 years apart, and probably before that they were probably more like 10 to 20 years apart. Okay, so everything's happening faster, and by the time you get to Jacob's era, he's got essentially four women producing kids for him, and he has a dozen kids within about, you know, probably over the course of about 10 years or less. Okay, so things are changing in terms of population growth, but from the post-flood era, it hasn't changed that much. And so think about the population from, you know, the Jews in Egypt. They're going to grow from 70 original souls plus their, you know, servants and stuff like that. So you're going to imagine a few thousand people growing to probably somewhere in the ballpark of 4 million over the course of 210 years. Okay, so 1,000 people can grow to millions in 210 years. Okay, well, in Noah's getting off the flood, you're going to have 70 people, but you're just going to have those 70 people. Okay. In within about 100 years. So how long is it going to take from them to get to the point where they're having the Tower of Babel? Well, you're looking at probably about 400 years. And so you see that where it's like, by the time Abraham's in Canaan, you're looking at somewhere in the early 1900s BC. Okay, and so they've been off the ark for about 500 years, which means they're going to have enough population to start building big civilizations again, and that's around the time where he defeats Amraphel, and probably after Amraphel's defeat, they start building the Tower of Babel to cement their civilization in history, and hopefully keep it prominent. And basically it looks like he starts forming a cult around the potentiality of God flooding the earth again. That's what it seems to be. Okay, and he seems to be the one who's projecting himself as the savior from God flooding the earth again, and that's what the Tower Project is all about. Okay, so that is going to happen around the time that Joseph goes into Egypt, the actual dispersion of languages, which is why you're going to find Job talking to Eliphaz the Temanite, which they would have been, two different people groups. They're both Semitic Hebrew peoples, but they're, according to the language tree in Genesis 10, they're of different language groups. Okay, you're going to find Abraham talking to the Amorites, to the Egyptians, to the Philistines, to the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, and those would have been at least 4 different language groups from the Table of Nation, and Abraham seems to go back and forth between them and Syria, and he's got servants from different places, and there doesn't seem to be any need for translation or anything like that. And then you get to the age of Joseph, and all of a sudden you've got an interpreter when people are coming from Canaan, which, well, Abraham and Isaac were right there, so they're obviously communicating with these guys before that. But by the time you get to Joseph now, all of a sudden he needs an interpreter to speak to these same people. That's because the Tower of Babel incident has happened. Okay, so I'm estimating that the actual confusion of languages is happening somewhere around the time Joseph gets sold into Egypt, and what happens is that confusion of language leads to the supply chain collapse that is going to lead to the great famine that happens, because you have you basically have this massive grain surplus coming from here, and it's basically they're selling grain throughout the entire region. Okay, which means they've got so much grain coming in, probably so efficiently, because they're basically building this tower and growing grain. That's what they're doing. They're not spending their resources necessarily on trying to conquer anymore. They've pretty much got, I would assume, between Assyria, so up here in the Tigris area, down through here, and then they've got trade probably with Egypt, with the Ganges civilization, with Ethiopia through the south. And essentially they're just it's a big grain belt. It's like America between the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. It's just lots of farming. Okay, and so all this farming is producing grain at such a cheap price that nobody else is really growing grain on a business scale anymore. They probably still have people who have their own, but they're not growing big scale anymore. And so the people are probably getting into other forms of fruits and vegetables and other things. They're actually probably buying grain, and their economies are advancing where they're becoming more stratified, and they're developing other materials and objects and things like that, pottery and clothes and metallurgy stuff, and they're just buying their grain from here. And then when the confusion of language happens, well, this is going to lead to a big disruption in the supply chain. And God, of course, knows this, and so this is why Jacob is getting in his dreams that you're going to have this 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And the 7 years of plenty are probably when you've got Egypt producing grain and they're doing good, but then you also have these guys producing grain and selling it to everybody the Egyptians would sell it to, which keeps the price of grain low. And so these 7 years of plenty, it's easy for them to store, that 20% that they're storing, because they're buying it. Pharaoh's buying it cheap, and he's storing it, while these guys basically have cheap food because it's all basically being sold in this market, while Canaan is probably getting a lot of theirs from the Middle East. And if you remember, after Amraphel is defeated, the Amorites are going to basically eventually take over probably after Nimrod dies, and they're eventually going to overthrow that civilization. Okay, and that probably happens after the Tower of Babel. That would be my assumption. Because once the Tower of Babel's dispersed, his kingdom is not unified anymore, and so it's easy for one family people group, which the Amorites kind of, were there when his armies were defeated, and they know what it takes. They're going to go in there and start to take over. So that's kind of your civilization backdrop. Again, remember, you're going to have probably this chain, which starts as like a Greeks, and then the Egyptians are going to take it over during that era. And so you're going to have tin coming from Cornwall. You're going to have tin probably and copper coming from Spain. You're going to have copper coming from Cyprus and between Crete. And probably up here where the Hittites are. The Hittites are the dominant civilization here after Amraphel collapses. They're going to basically run the bronze trade to a large part. And then the Egyptians are going to start to grow, and the Hittites and the Egyptians become the main two kingdoms after Nimrod's kingdom starts to fall apart. The Japhethites are going to skedaddle and start migrating up around here and around here, all the way out to basically what's now Mongolia and China and the Stan countries and stuff like that. They're just going to get out of there, and they're not going to be subject to Nimrod and his kingdom. And then the Thracians, that's going to be Tyrus and Troy. This is going to be up in here. The Ionians are going to be down in here. The other ones, again, Magog is going to go way over here. Meshach is going to go up here. Gomer is going to go right here. He's going to have 3 sons, which become the Turks, the Russians, and the Germans, essentially. And that's the world we live in. Okay, so that's the world we live in. We know it's gotten to a place where people are buying and selling servants and slaves, and it looks like that's starting with probably debt slavery that turns into, okay, well, you were born the child of a debt slave, and your dad's my debt slave because he couldn't pay his debts, and those children are essentially your property. That whole house comes underneath you, and you probably have something similar to what is being espoused in the law of Moses. And it's probably more just and more fair. You weren't beating your servants. You weren't treating them like, animals, like cattle and stuff. Essentially, they owed you your debt, and so they basically become your permanent employee. But within that, you have certain rights to them, like conjugal rights. Okay, like this is just what's going on. And apparently it's been going on within a few hundred years before the flood, and I would imagine it was probably custom, or it's a few hundred years after the flood. So these customs probably started before the flood. You just probably had people who, again, how do you pay your debts when you can't pay your debts? And the answer is you become the servant of the person you pay your debt to. Okay, so you're going to have the same, entrepreneurial, loan me some money and so I can build this farm, so I can buy these tools, blah blah blah, and then you have some bad crop years and stuff like that, or you mismanage your money and you can't pay them back. Okay, just the people who are good at math versus the people who aren't. Okay, this is how the world works. And by the time you get into Joseph's era, remember, we're looking at probably around, I'm going to say, I think 1700s BC. Okay, when this is going to happen. So now we're going to be in the generations of Jacob. We're going into Joseph's captivity. So this is in chapter 37. He says, Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. Okay, remember, he's still up in Shechem here. He says, these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding his flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah. Okay, so, and it says, with the sons of Zilpah, their father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father an evil report. So notice he's not with the sons of Leah. Okay, he's with the sons of this is going to be Dan, Naphtali, and Bilhah. I forget, there's going to be 2 sons from him. I think it's Issachar and I think Asher. These 4 sons are going to kind of be the lower ranking sons, and you're going to see this in the distribution of the land. Okay, they're not going to get the highlands. The highlands are going to go primarily to Judah and Ephraim. Obviously, Levi and Simeon, Joseph basically they're going to be corralled within Judah and Ephraim, essentially. That's where the priesthood's going to be. And then you're going to have these other four sons are going to kind of get the lowlands. And so these people are going to get, the Danites were supposed to get the territory between Judah and the Philistines. And they are supposed to essentially conquer the Philistines or at least work around them, okay? The Philistines, though, have oaths that have been taken by Abraham and Isaac that they're going to deal well with them. And so there's a reason why the Philistines are able to stay there and endure, and God's not basically blessing the Israelites to just remove them from the land, because Abraham and Isaac have made oaths with them, okay? And so, so these guys are going to end up in basically the valley, from the Gaza Valley through the Megiddo Valley. Those are going to be their primary territories, and that's why it's going to be called the Valley of the Shadow of Death, because if you have invasions coming through, that's where they're going to come through, okay? So they don't get the best land. The Reubenites are going to, get the land across the Jordan. They're going to kind of pick their land. Same thing with Manasseh. They're going to get the land straddling the Jordan, and that's going to be good for herding and stuff like that, and they're going to be pretty strong peoples. Ephraim's going to be strong. Judah's going to be strong. Simeon is not so much. Reuben is going to be kind of weaker too, but that's the one he goes up into his father's bed, so he's kind of cursed not to grow much. So Simeon, Levi, and Reuben don't get the major blessings, but Judah and Ephraim, which is Joseph's eldest son, are going to, and really both of Joseph's sons, so Judah, Ephraim, and Manasseh are going to be your powerhouse tribes of the 12, okay? So remember, he's hanging out with the sons of the concubines, which are already the least favored, okay? And it says with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. So notice these concubines are counted as their wives. And Joseph brought unto his father an evil report. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. So again, this is the firstborn son. He's older when he has him, and he is the firstborn of his favorite wife. His wife has died. So obviously this son that reminds him of his favorite wife is going to get some excessive favor, and he gives him a coat of many colors, and that's going to tick off all his brothers. And he already starts out with him telling on the older sons about something, or these sons about something. And remember, most of these brothers, if you look at the history, are within 5-6 years of each other, okay? So remember, Leah's going to have 6 kids, and then Rachel's going to have her kids, and it's going to be kind of competitive. So again, you're looking at 4 women producing kids, and then after all those kids are produced, she's going to have Joseph. Okay, so he's basically the baby of the first 11, and he's telling on his older brothers, who are probably adults while he's a teenager, young adults. Okay, and then they knew that his dad loved him more; he favored him. And then Joseph starts having his dreams, and these dreams are going to be important, because in the first one he talks about sheaves standing round about that made obeisance to his sheaf. Maria Woodworth-Etter is going to have a similar vision about sheaves falling down by her preaching, okay? Delusions of grandeur. And you see his brethren says to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? And shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him even more for his dreams. Then he's going to dream and say, have another one. He says, behold, I dream more, and the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. So obviously he would be the 12th star. And he is dreaming the fact that he's going to be the prime minister of Egypt, and he's going to be basically ruling over his brothers at some point in time. But the point is this that you want to take this away, because this is in the book of Revelation, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars, because you're going to have a woman who is the sun, the moon, and the 12 stars. Okay, so obviously Joseph is the 12th star. That is going to be a symbol of the house of Israel. Now this is ethnic Israel. That's the house of Jacob, okay? And so you're going to see it was his father who, he says, his father rebukes him when he says this. And he says, what is this dream that you have? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come bow ourselves before him? So first he's talked about his brothers bowing before him. Now he's talking about his mom and dad bowing before him too. And that's when his dad rebukes him. And he's like, watch, slow your roll, son. Slow your roll. And his brother now beat him, but his father observed the saying. This is like, remember Mary keeping Jesus's, the weird stuff he says in her heart, right? Because it's going to mean something later. His father observed the saying, okay, which means he remembered it, okay? And then his brethren went to feed his father's Shechem. This is before they fled Shechem with all the people. And probably none of his brothers are married yet. They're probably all young men, haven't found wives yet. And then it says, I will, he's going to send them to his brothers, and his brothers know he's a little snitch. He thinks he's better than us. Dad likes him more. We don't like this guy. And it says he's going to go out to the Vale of Hebron. Oh, okay. And then he came to Shechem. So maybe he is in Hebron already. He says, but it doesn't make sense that they're going to Shechem to water their flocks unless, Shechem's now just empty land where they're herding, or they were shepherding, and now it's empty land. And whenever they go there, they can say, "What happened to people of Shechem? I don't know. We're just nomads. We just come in here. I don't know," because originally that's why they skedaddled, but it looks like they're still there. So he says he sent him out of the Vale of Hebron. That's where Isaac's dwelling, and they're going back to Shechem. So apparently they're quite a journey away. Okay. And then it says a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, "What seekest thou?" And he says, "I seek my brethren. Tell me, pray thee, for they feed the flocks." And the man said, "They departed from here, and I heard them. Let's go to Dothan." So Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. If they're in Hebron living with Isaac, they just got there, because they were in Shechem for a little bit, and his sons are obviously old enough to kill everyone in the city. So they're adults, which means Joseph is like a young lad then, probably a teenager now. And so they said, "Behold, the dreamer comes," and they put him in a pit, and they're like, "Let's kill him." No, they said, "Let's kill him and throw him in a pit." Like they just want to murder him. And then say an evil beast devoured him. And Reuben heard it, and Reuben wants to deliver him out of their hands. Now, Reuben, we're going to find out, I don't know if this has happened yet, but he goes up into his father's bed. In other words, he sleeps. He's the oldest son, which means he's going to get his male urges first, and he sleeps with one of his father's concubines. Now remember, they got 4 women around the house, but these younger women were much younger probably than Rachel and Leah. These would have been like servant girls. And so when Rachel and Leah, he marries them, they may be, let's say, in their 20s, maybe 20 to 30, okay? But they've got these servant girls that are like teenagers. And so by the time Reuben is, let's say, 20 years old, these servant girls are in their mid-30s. So they're pretty prime. He's not sleeping with them on a regular basis. They're servants, so they're staying busy, so they're fit, okay? And they don't get much man attention, because once he's had his kids with Leah and Rachel, the servant girls are not being given up for the nights, okay? And so they haven't had any male attention, and she probably likes the attention, and he likes the attention, and he sleeps with his father's concubine. And his father is going to curse him to not grow much as a tribe because of that, okay? So probably Reuben has... he's the firstborn son, but he has a reason to need to get back into his father's good graces. And so he's like, no, don't kill him, cast him in the pit, and then lay no hand upon him, that he may rid him out of the hands and deliver him to his father again. So Reuben actually had a plan to rescue Joseph, okay? And so they were going to murder him, and Reuben talks him into just throwing him in a pit, but not kill him. And then he was going to plan to deliver him again. And so they took him and cast him in the pit. And then basically they sell him to the Ishmaelites, who are coming out of Gilead. So this is probably not Gilead yet. Maybe it is. And they're carrying their spices of balm and myrrh down into Egypt. Now what's going on here? Well, if this is in the book of Jasher, that basically the Egyptians' burial rituals and stuff like that are starting, and these balms and myrrhs are coming from Arabia that they're using, okay? So this stuff is going to spread into Israel and stuff like that. These burial rituals of essentially wrapping people up and mummifying them, okay? Well, these burial rituals is basically Egypt is starting to grow into a cult based around you need to get buried like this in order to be resurrected. That's essentially what it is. Okay, remember, they've believed in the resurrection of the dead, but they think they're convincing the rich that they have to be buried a certain way to be in a better place in the resurrection or to be resurrected. Whatever it is, it starts out with a guy who basically just gets a bunch of soldiers, and he's from Mesopotamia, so he probably knows a little bit about culty stuff because cults are being built up in Mesopotamia. And this is before Abraham goes into Egypt, okay? And this is before you have a king named Pharaoh. Well, this guy, you just have the king Osiris of Egypt, and apparently this guy is going to get a bunch of thugs, hire them, and train them to not let people bury their dead where they would normally bury them until they pay the toll. And this is where you're going to get the whole pay the boatman for the toll, the 2 coins on their eyes to pay the boatman for the toll to get to the other side, okay? Because this guy would actually make people pay a toll to bury their dead, and they'd eventually plead to the king because it was getting so excessive. He was charging them a good pile of silver to pay their debt, and he got so rich that he could essentially have a small army of mercenaries basically working for him. And then when the king gets there to put a stop to it, he gives like half the money to the king, and the king likes that. And so the king's like, hey, that's pretty good, I'm going to call you Pharaoh, and he names this guy Pharaoh. Well, not long after that, you have him going down to Egypt, and the kings are called Pharaoh. So either the kings took over that business, which is essentially a cult, or this guy marries into them, and actually, his descendants or whoever is this Pharaoh guy becomes the king of Egypt. And what happens is the tribe that becomes the king of Egypt is going to be the tribe of Captor, which is where the Philistines come out of. It looks like they could be from the tribe of Chalsuhim, but they come out of Captor. And they're going to go up into Crete, possibly into Cyprus as well, and then the shores of Israel, and they're going to be essentially an Egyptian, almost like a mercenary tribe, where they're essentially pulling weight in Crete and in Israel and oppressing the people around them, and it looks like they've probably taken over the bronze trade, okay? And meanwhile, in Egypt, because they have this growing burial cult going, now you have a trade of myrrh and balm coming from Arabia that they're using for the spices for burying the dead, because now they're putting them in tombs. They're not just burying them in the ground, and that stinketh. Okay, and because it stinketh, you need balms and myrrhs and stuff like that. So the Midianites are passing by. And remember, the Midianites, it says that they're passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. Okay? So the Ishmaelites obviously are sons of Ishmael. The Midianites are sons of Abraham's wife after Sarah. Okay? Keturah. And so they're probably mixing already. That would be my guess, and that's why they just call them Ishmaelites. They might be Midianite merchantmen who are among the Ishmaelites. And Arab actually means mixed people. So you probably have all these people mixing in the desert. And they're going to get him out of the pit and sell him to Egypt. Reuben's going to return to the pit, and Joseph is gone. We find out it's actually Judah's idea to sell him for 20 pieces of silver. And you're going to have a foretype of Judah in Judas. Okay, Judas is going to have Jesus sold for 30 pieces of silver. Judah is going to have Joseph sold for 20 pieces of silver. So we see a typology here. And Joseph is going to be essentially, remember, Isaac is going to be a major type of the Christ child, obviously being sacrificed for sin. Joseph is going to be a type of the Christ child being betrayed. Okay, so you're going to have Abel is going to be a type of the Christ being killed for our transgressions. And so you're going to have these types go. Okay, Noah's going to be a type of Christ, and then in a sense, Abraham's going to be a type of Christ. And then Jacob is going to be, Israel is a type of Christ, because it says God, he shall rule as God, I think is what Israel means. But Jacob is a type of a born-again person, okay, because he gets his name changed. He goes from being a deceiver to being somebody who's elect, essentially. And then it says that they basically are going to take his blood and they're going to kill a goat and dip it in the blood and say a lion got him. Okay, Jacob's going to rent his clothes. He's going to be so sad. The Midianites sold him to Egypt. So it looks like he sells them to the Ishmaelites, the Midianites, and they sell him to Egypt, to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's. He's the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Okay, so he's going to be a military officer, essentially, he sells him to. And Joseph is educated. He comes from, the stock of people who have been running a business, okay? They've essentially been running a shepherding business with lots of servants. They're probably doing more than shepherding, because we know Isaac's farming. So they're farming, they're shepherding, and they're trading. They've accumulated a lot of wealth. And the family household he comes from, which is he's being groomed up to manage, because he is essentially the favored son of the favored wife, okay? And so he's actually being groomed to take over his father's household. Now Jacob is probably not planning on giving the whole thing to him, because he's not the firstborn. But remember, Jacob's not the firstborn. And so he might be planning on giving it to him. He might have taken the dream of Joseph seriously and said he's meant to rule over his brothers, and he's my favorite son, my favorite wife, and he might be training up Jacob to manage the others. So he's going to have some education. He's going to know his numbers. He's going to have some, people and reporting skills and stuff like that. He's going to learn about snitching and figure that out. So he's going to learn how to be a little bit more socially cautious after that. And he's going to be smart. And so he's going to advance there. Meanwhile, back at the Batcave, Judah is, remember, he's the guilty one. He is the one whose idea was to sell him, okay? So having that guilt on him, he's also going to come under judgment, okay? So Reuben was going to get him. The boys wanted to kill him, but they threw him in a pit. Reuben was going to get him. Judah came up with the bright idea of selling him. Remember, he is the fourth-born son, okay? So why is Judah, if he comes up with the betrayal idea, the one who ends up being the one who Christ comes from? And this is why he's going to receive double judgment for what happened. So this is... It says, Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and he took her and he went into her. So he is going to get a Canaanite wife. For some reason, he's leaving his brothers. Now he's probably in his 30s at least now. It doesn't really say exactly when this is, though. So we know Joseph is probably in Egypt for something like 20 years before they come to him, because Jacob is going to be, he's going to die at 147. He's in Egypt 17 years. There's 20 years between the, I'm sorry. It could be any time, actually. He could be a middle-aged man by the time they go into Egypt, because it's somewhere in this 50-year period where Isaac dies. After that, within 6 years of that, they're going to go meet Joseph in Egypt. Okay, so in that meantime, Judah is going to have kids who grow up into adulthood. Okay, so remember, this is a period of about 50 years. So don't think it's like, okay, Joseph is at least in Egypt probably 20, 30 years before they get there. Okay, And it says Judah has a daughter with a Canaanite, and his name is and then another one named Onan, and then another one named Shelah. Okay? And it says he was at Chezib when she bare him. So apparently this is this place. Agzib, there's Hebron, he's up here, okay? So he's wandered away a bit. And he's gotten himself a Canaanite wife, and he's got 3 kids now. But these kids are going to grow up, and they're going to probably be in their 20s, so some time has passed. And his firstborn son, it just says he was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Doesn't say what he did, just said God considered him wicked, so he killed him. So then he's going to do a version of the Levirate law. So we know this was custom before it comes into the law of Moses, okay? And he's going to tell his son to go into his brother's wife and marry her and raise up seed to his brother. Now, my guess would be that this custom is in place because of a belief that, the Messiah has to come through the line of Shem. And so therefore everybody in the line of Shem needs to raise up seed to their brothers. I don't think we really have this practice outside of the line of Shem, but my guess is that it's based around the fact that the Messiah needs to come from him, and therefore no lines of Shem need to be cut off. Okay, it's like a religious thing to go, your line shouldn't be cut off. That's like being blotted out from the book of life, and that's like being accursed. Okay, that would be my guess, just random guess. But anyways, Onan knows that the child is not going to be his, so he's sleeping with her, and he's deliberately pulling out. And God did not like that, and so God killed him also. So this is where Christians are going to come up with the idea. You're going to hear that, if you masturbate, God's going to kill you, or it's a grievous sin. Okay, the Bible actually doesn't talk about that in particular, but it does talk about ejaculation, making you unclean for a day. Okay, so apparently it's something that's going on. Okay, so I would assume that God made a certain allowance for this is not good, but it's going to happen. That would be my assumption, because it's just like God he knows how the body's designed. Okay, so this is not telling you that you're going to be cursed if you do the deed. Okay, what this is a specific thing where this is the Levirate law, and this does go into the law of Moses. So you're going to assume that there's a certain God has ordained this somehow. Okay, and so God is going to kill him because he's deliberately not raising up seed for his brother. Okay, and then it says the thing that displeased the Lord, so he kills him also. So Judah, being an idiot, is going to be like, oh, this woman must be cursed, right? Not my son was wicked, or my other son was wicked. Not I'm under judgment because I basically sold my father's favorite son, and it was my idea, and now I'm reaping what I've sown. He's going to be like, oh, it's the woman. So he doesn't give the third son, and he's going to have her remain a widow at his father's house until his other son's old. So he's got a third son, and he's probably not quite a man yet. And then it says, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did, and Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Oh, so it's her father's house. So he's essentially setting her home like a divorced woman to live as a widow. And in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted. It says, in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, so Judah's wife dies, and it says, and Judah was comforted. He went up to the sheep shearers of Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. So he was comforted. Okay, I would assume this is the story of how he's comforted. He went up to the sheep shearers to his friends, and it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goes up to Timnah to shear the sheep. And she put off her widow's garments from her, and covered her, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to wife. Okay, and when Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot because she had covered her face. So apparently this is something. Listen to this. I want you to hear this. Muslims, tell your Muslim friends. He thought she was a harlot because she covered her face. This was the custom apparently in Canaan and among the Hebrews and among the children of Abraham. If you cover your face, you're considered a harlot. Think about that. Okay? And he turned unto her by the way and said, Go, I pray thee, let me come unto thee. Come in unto thee. In other words, let me sleep with you. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me? And I'll give you a kid from the flock. And she says, What are you going to give me as like a down payment? Okay, like a surety to get it. And so he gives her his signet, which I would assume is like a signet ring, and his bracelets and the staff that's in his hand. And give it to her. And these things are all going to have significance, tribal significance. Okay, these staffs probably tell the story of their generations, right? They're probably going to have like hieroglyphs. And we know around this time the Egyptians are starting to develop hieroglyphs. The Amorites are going to develop cuneiform. So cuneiform, I was mistaken. I thought cuneiform had been around before the Tower of Babel. It's not. It's developed by the Amorites, and the Code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi is an Amorite. Okay, and so that language is just going to be for them after the dispersion of language, and the Egyptians, who are going to be a more cosmopolitan civilization, are going to use hieroglyphs because they're pictures, and pictures make more sense when you're communicating with a bunch of people with different languages. Okay, and it says she rose and went away, laid her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood after she slept with him. Okay, and Judah sent the kid by the hand of the Adulamites to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, Where is the harlot that was opened by the wayside? And they said, There's no harlot in this place. So apparently, if you were a woman and you were not anybody's servant, it was a common way to make your living as a harlot, but it wasn't rare. It was rare. So there's no harlot in this place. Okay. And so she returned to Judah, and he said, I cannot find her. But also the men of this place said, There's no harlot in this place. And Judah said, Let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. Oh, he's basically saying, let her keep the stuff that she took. So he's essentially got some jewelry, his signet ring, and his staff. So he's kind of given up some heirlooms to a prostitute. He is not the wisest dude. Okay, and then when she said, it came to pass about 3 months later that it was told to Judah, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot, and behold, she's with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth and let her be burnt. They were going to burn her alive for no grace for Judah. Okay, mind you, he's made her a widow who can never be with anyone else again, because he's obligated to bring up seed for his son, but he won't do it. Okay? And so he's made this woman who's had a husband die, and now the guy who's raising up seed to her die, and she's got no kid, she's a widow, and he wants her to be burned alive because she went and had sex. And it's not just having sex. Remember, that kid, your parents are taking care of you. There's not really many trades for a woman. And her parents are taking care of her, and eventually they're going to get old and die. Who's going to take care of her after she's old when her parents are old and dead? And the answer would be her kids. That's it. Women are almost entirely housewives. Okay? They know how to cook, they know how to clean, they know how to do stuff. They do not run businesses. Okay? They don't know how to do much outside of the house except for be a harlot. You don't have a stratified society where they can get a job as a seamstress. Okay, these are tribal groups, and so she's doing what she's got to do to survive. Okay, it's more than just comfort and stuff like that. So Judah, when she does it, she shows her thing. She shows the bracelets and the staff and the signet. Said, "Whose are these? This is who got me pregnant. Whose are these?" And he acknowledged them. He says, she has been more righteous than I, because he gave her not as to Shelah his son. And he knew she was doing what she had to do. But it was also their custom to raise up seed to their brother. And she's actually carrying out God's rule for them, apparently. And he is not giving up Shelah to do that. So he says, she's more righteous than I. Okay? And it came to pass in the time of her travail. So this is important. He's having a son with his daughter-in-law. And he's lost 2 sons. He's starting to wake up to the fact that he's unrighteous. Okay? And she travails, and she's going to have twins. And in the twins, you're going to have the older one put out his hand first, and they're going to put a scarlet thread on him. So whenever you see scarlet in the Bible, it represents the blood of Jesus, okay? And so that is going to be marked on the older one that comes out first, okay? His arm's going to come out, and then he pulls his arm back. And so then the younger one is going to come out first. And his name is going to be, he's broke forth. He breached. In other words, he's opened the womb, okay? And so the younger one is going to be called Pharez, and his name means breach. Now, this is important. Adam makes a breach between man and God, okay? Then the younger one comes, and the younger one means Zerah, and Zerah means seed, okay? So you have the younger one, who's actually the older one, whose name is breach, okay? There's Adam. And then you have the older one who comes last, whose name is the seed, okay? They're types of Adam and Christ, okay? Now, I shared this with a Jew, an Orthodox Jew, and he had tears in his eyes after I told him, okay? And I told him about Christ and Antichrist, and I told him about Antichrist coming, and that the Jews better not bow to him. This guy his eyes were welling up with tears as I was telling him this, okay? They're not used to Gentiles knowing stuff like this. They're told Gentiles don't know anything about the Bible. And I just showed him Adam and Jesus from here, okay? That's the one who caused the breach, and that's the seed, okay? And there's a type there because one's actually older, and that's why John Baptist is going to say about Jesus, he will be essentially superior to me because he came before me. John the Baptist is physically older than Jesus in his birth. But he keeps saying how Jesus came before him because Jesus came from eternity. Okay? So they're playing this out. And this is going to be an important type. And Judah, who gets his comeuppance, he is going to repent. And he's going to try to put his life on the line to save Benjamin later. And that's why the line of Jesus is going to come from him. Okay? So Joseph's brought down to Egypt. So remember, it's going back and forth in the timeline. Don't think this is back and forth. Now, meanwhile, back at the Batcave, Joseph goes down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, captain the guard of the Egyptian, brought him out of the hand of the Ishmaelites and brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was made the house master of the Egyptians. So the Lord's blessing him, and everything he touches, he's got some good ideas. He moves up. He's managing. So don't think this happens overnight. This happens over years. Okay. I forget how old he is. I think it's going to cover it, how old he is when his brothers get there. But he's middle-aged. He goes from being a teenager to a middle-aged man, maybe 40s or 50s. He is actually grown after years in prison and working for this guy. And then he has kids who are probably young lads at that time. Okay? The master saw the Lord was with him. The Lord made him to prosper in all he had. Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him. So in other words, he sees that this kid's no scrub, okay? And he starts treating him better. He puts him over all his house. He is essentially in charge of his household. So all his household servants. So these guys, remember, his main job is going to be, he's the captain of Pharaoh's guard, which means he is over the people who physically guard the Pharaoh. This is not the army. It's more like the Republican Guard. So they're probably going to guard the Pharaoh himself and probably his palace, maybe even his city. Okay? And so he's got a very high position in Pharaoh's court, which means he is attending to Pharaoh a lot. And he's not at home a lot. And back home, he is going to have probably flocks and herds and some farming stuff going on because he's in Egypt. And he might have some other business. They might be making stuff out of wool. He might be just multiplying his income streams and stuff like that as he's doing this. And he puts Joseph over everything because Joseph knows, remember his family knows farming, knows herding, knows trading, okay? And assume if these people have hundreds of servants, they're eventually going to grow to the point where they're making clothes, they're making pottery, they're selling them. They've got businesses going on, okay? And it's the poor people who have to buy this stuff, or the rich people who are doing something else. The middle class are buying the stuff from them. But essentially, they're manufacturing, they're producing food, and they're multiplying wealth. And Joseph's over all that. And so it came to pass that he made him overseer of his house and over all he had, and he blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all he had and in the field. Okay, all he had in the house and in the field. Okay. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had save the bread which he ate. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Now listen what he said. And he knew not aught he had save the bread that he ate. In other words, Joseph was in charge of multiplying his wealth and all his business. He didn't know anything about it but what the food came to his table. Joseph did his accounting. Joseph knew everything. He was the guy, okay? He was running his business, okay? And it came to pass after these things. Now remember, you got this young man who's probably a teenager at the beginning. Now he's a young man. He's running all this guy's business. Her husband's gone all the time. If he's as high attendant to Pharaoh, he's probably got a good-looking young wife, because the gold diggers are going to find guys like this, right? And whoever's family is going to give them to her, they're probably classy. But she's probably younger. She's probably good-looking, and her husband is gone all the time. And she's got this guy who is smart with money, and he's young, and he's good looking, and he's always in her presence, okay, because he's running the house. And so she's like, I want him. And she tries to sleep with him. He says, no. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not that is with me. Wotteth not. What does wotteth mean? Yada. It's the word observes or cares not. In other words, he gives him so much freedom he doesn't even ask what he's doing. Okay? He trusts him that much, okay? And he's saying, my master doesn't even pay attention to what I do in all his house. He's committed everything he has into my hand. There is none greater in this house than I. And this is important. He's a major Christ type. Wherever he goes, there is none greater than him except for the greatest one in the house. Okay? This is Jesus. This is the type of Jesus. Remember, the only one greater than Jesus is the Father. And for those of you who have a problem with functional hierarchy in the Trinity, Jesus flat out says the Father is greater than him. Okay? So Joseph is saying there's none greater in his house than him. There's none greater in Pharaoh's house than Joseph. Whatever house he's in, he's second to the Father alone. He's second to Jacob. He's second to Potiphar. He's the right hand of Pharaoh. He is the type of Christ wherever he goes. And he says, neither has he kept back anything from me, but thou art his wife. How then shall I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Okay? The one thing he's kept from me. This is where Adam fails and Joseph succeeds. So your Calvinists are going to tell you how everybody's so wicked, and but by the grace of God, they do nothing but wickedness all the time. Well, Joseph has definitely found grace in the eyes of God, and he's blessing him, but Joseph is not doing this wickedness, okay? Doesn't mean he's sinless. He's never sinned before. It also doesn't mean that his righteousness has earned him freedom from the curse of Adam's sin, okay? But he's a righteous man. He understands he's got a good thing going, and he's been given all this grace and all this favor to being like a son in this guy's house the same way he was in his father's house, despite the fact that his brothers hated him and threw him into slavery. Okay? He knows that God is blessing him, and he's not about to screw it up by sleeping with this guy's wife. So it came to pass, she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie with her or to be by her. So she's pressing him for a while. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went in the house to do business, and there was none of the men in the house with him. Okay? That was unwise. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. And it had come to pass that when she saw that he had left the garment in his hand and has fled forth, I don't know what their garments would have looked like, but Egyptians would have worn like a skirt, like a kilt kind of thing, and it was always hot, so most of them probably just were like, topless. Men were topless with a skirt type thing and some sandals, and then they might have had like an outer garment that would cover him up. I would assume maybe she grabbed his skirt and he runs out there in his underwear. I don't know. And so she calls to the men of her house and spake to them, saying, he brought a Hebrew in to mock us. Remember, Hebrews are a bunch of people. All the Arab tribes are Hebrews. And the Canaanites that are not sons of Canaan, remember their cousins to Egypt, are Hebrews. Okay? He says, unto us to mock us, he came to be with me and lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice, and it came to pass that when he heard I lifted up my voice and cried, he ran. He left his garment and ran. So she set him up. And basically he's going to say the same thing. It says until his Lord came home. So when Potiphar came home, she's going to tell the same lie to him. And it came to pass that his master heard the words of his wife when she spoke unto him, saying, after this matter did they serve unto me, and his wrath is kindled. And Joseph's matter took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever he did there, he was the doer of it. So now he's the right hand of the prison guard. Where whatever house he's in, he ends up being the right hand. He ends up being the top guy over all the other guys. He's Christ. He is like the firstborn of whatever, he keeps descending. Okay? He goes from being in his father's house to being a slave to being in prison, which is typically in Egypt going to be in a pit. Okay? This is like Jesus going from heaven to earth to Sheol. Okay? He keeps getting down lower, but wherever he goes, he's the top ranked guy. So when Jesus ends up in Sheol, he gets the keys to death and Hades. Okay? Because the favor of God is with him. And it says, the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and everything he did, he made it to prosper. And so in other words, he works his way up in the prison. So he is like, if you guys have ever seen Shawshank Redemption, where this guy's an accountant, and he's in prison, and he eventually starts helping the warden to the point where he's got all this favor in prison, because he's doing the warden's taxes, and he's helping him basically, get tax breaks and stuff like that, and he's helping basically the warden and the guards make money, okay, out of the prison. Well, this is kind of what Joseph does, and he's basically, the warden is just like, okay, you can run the prison. And I would imagine there's something going on with the prison more than just this. Either he's seeing to the distribution of food, maybe there's prison labor going on, whatever it is, Joseph's running it, and the guard is sitting back and watching sports on TV, like a lazy guard. Okay, and so he's got this favor. He's a go-to guy. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended the Lord of the king of Egypt. Okay, now remember, he's in the Pharaoh's own city, because he is a slave to the captain of the Pharaoh's guard in the first place, and now he's in the prison that's in the Pharaoh's city, and so he is getting pretty high ranking prisoners among them. And this is how the butcher and the baker show up. And Pharaoh was mad against these two officers. Remember, these are the guys who, the butler, and I think he's like the wine taster. I think that's who he is. And the baker is in charge of his food. Okay. And these guys would be, if there was a plot to poison the Pharaoh, these guys would be the ones who take the rap for it. Okay. And he said, his two officers, so the chief of the butlers, so maybe this guy is just over all his servants, and then the chief of the bakers, this is the guy that's over all his kitchen. Okay. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison. So remember, the captain of the guard is Potiphar. Okay, so Potiphar also runs the prison, the place where Joseph was born. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued to season in ward. In other words, they're put into custody. They're in jail. They have not been tried yet. Okay, so they're not just in prison indefinitely. they're going to get tried for something. And they dreamed a dream about both of them, each man in his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, and the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in prison. And Joseph came to them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and they said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me. And in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and the blossoms shot forth, and clusters thereof, and forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in thy hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave them the cup in Pharaoh's hand. So I would assume this head of Pharaoh's butlers is also his wine taster, okay? And this guy is going to take a drink of the Pharaoh's wine in front of him to show him it's not poison. That's his role. So it's you're basically putting your life on the line if anyone's trying to poison Pharaoh, okay? And it would also probably happen with, the head of the bakers. He might take a taste of the food before Pharaoh to prove it's not poison, okay? So it's competitive to be the Pharaoh. Remember, the pharaohs are from the line of Captor, which are actually the youngest Egyptian tribe. So if you guys have paid attention to me explaining these river systems, what you seem to have is a what's the point of having a Nile River with no picture of the Nile River? What you seem to have is a system of older brothers pushing their younger brothers down river, okay? And so the Cushites are going to be upriver, and they're going to be, up in Ethiopia, and they're going to push the Mizraimites downriver, and assume that downriver is going to be up here, okay? So here's the Cushites, who are going to be up in Ethiopia and Sudan. And this gets taken over by Arabs later. That's why you have Arab peoples here, okay? But before, these were all Cushites up here in these Blue Nile and White Nile. And that's why it's going to talk about this land beyond the rivers of Cush in Isaiah, the land whom the rivers divide, because there's the Blue Nile and the White Nile become the main Nile River. And the Cushites are going to be all around this river system, and they're going to branch out from there and have their tribes and colonies and whatnot. And then Lower Egypt is going to be divided between Upper Egypt up here and Lower Egypt down here. And you're going to assume that the oldest brothers probably are up here and the younger brothers are going to go down here, which is Captor, which is the youngest, ends up down here where it's a sprawl. And he's going to have this marshy land, but it's actually very good for farming. And then he's also going to have the ports, which are going to connect him with the other places. And so therefore, they become the dominant Egyptian tribe. And they're eventually going to rule all of it after this famine, okay? But before that, you're going to have multiple kings of Egypt. Because remember, you have something like 5 or 6 Egyptian tribes. You have 7 Egyptian tribes, okay? So he's the youngest. He also could be this guy Pharaoh, his descendants taking over basically this high role, and it could be competitive, okay? He might not be like a king of Egypt. This just might be the Pharaoh's household. But apparently they are close to what the Jews would face when they first get there, because they're always dealing with Pharaoh. Okay, so Pharaoh is not king of all of Egypt yet. This is important. So anyways, he's going to interpret these guys' dreams. One of you is going to die, and the other one of you is going to be, if you will, it's a kind of resurrection unto judgment, and the other you is going to be resurrection unto restoration unto the king. Okay? And that is what Jesus does in Sheol. Those who believe in him are going to be restored unto eternal life. Those who don't are going to be resurrected unto judgment. Okay? So they're both coming out of this prison, but one of them is going to die. And the one who's going to die, he's going to be, what does he say? Baker tells him his dream, and he says, the birds ate the basket out of his head. So the guy who dies, it looks like he's going to hang him on a tree, and the birds just going to eat the flesh off of him. That's how he's going to die. So he's either going to just hang him and kill him, and then the birds are going to eat him, or he's actually going to hang him on a tree and let the vultures pick the meat off him. That's how he's going to die. It's going to be bad. Because apparently this guy was involved with a plot to poison the Pharaoh. Not good. It came to pass on the day it was Pharaoh's birthday that he made a feast to all his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief butler and the chief baker among the servants, and restored the chief butler to his butlership again. And then he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker and Joseph, as Joseph had interpreted him. So apparently there's a plot to poison the Pharaoh. Maybe the Pharaoh got sick. Maybe somebody else died. We don't know what happened. But it falls on one of these guys on who was in charge, who let this happen or was in the plot. And apparently it turns out that it was the baker, but the cupbearer, who was also the head of his butlers apparently, he is okay now. Okay, now Nehemiah is going to be one of these guys for the king of Persia later on, and I take that back. I think just Nehemiah is. I thought maybe Daniel and some of those guys were, but I don't think they were. But Nehemiah was definitely this guy for the king of Persia at one point in time. Okay. So at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreams, so 2 years after Pharaoh has this dream, 2 years after the baker and the butler had this dream, Pharaoh's gonna have a dream, and Joseph says, "Remember, don't forget me. When you go before Pharaoh." And Pharaoh's gonna have a dream. And Butler's going to be like, this guy told me my dream and he restored it. This guy has a prophetic gift or something like that. And so Pharaoh's going to say, well, what's going on here? And he's going to tell him there's going to be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. Now, there are people who are like prophesying that we're in the 7 years of plenty. I don't think we're in the 7 years of plenty, okay? Now, this is people are going to take this and they're going to project it into Daniel's 70th week and say there's going to be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. I think we passed the 7 years of plenty. Now we're going into 7 years of famine. And I think at the end of the 7 years of famine, which is going to be essentially the 6 seals, you're going to have Antichrist, who's going to be a type of Pharaoh, basically take over the world, just like the Pharaoh takes over all of Egypt after these 7 years of famine. Okay? So I think you're going to have an orchestrated worldwide famine plus World War III. And in the meantime, you're going to have someone who's the Antichrist who's been storing and not expending his resources like everyone else is. And if you guys have not been paying attention, think of a country that has big ambitions but has not been expending its resources like you're seeing America do and Russia do and China do and Israel do, and all these other countries are blowing their resources for something, on everything. And meanwhile, there's this one country, Turkey, which has walled off its entire country. They know World War III is coming. They're not dumb. Okay, we're dumb, but Turkey's not dumb. They have walled off this entire country. Okay? They've been walling off this country since Russia started getting involved in Syria. They know this is going to World War III. There is no way freaking Russia from up here. Russia is not, they have a lot of military intelligence resources, but they don't have a massive economy. They cannot afford to be down here unless they have a bigger plan going on. And of course they have a plan going on. They have been planning with Iran and China and other parties. Russia's got people in Egypt now, in Libya. They've got the Wagner Group operating in sub-Saharan Africa and Saharan Africa. Something is going on towards World War III, and Turkey sees it coming. So they have walled off everything, okay? They have controlled the flow of these immigrants going into Europe, all these Muslim immigrants, okay? They know it's coming. They're biding their time. They're building up their resource base like Pharaoh did. Okay? This is where I believe the Antichrist is going to come from. I believe he's going to be a Danite. Meanwhile, look at this. Remember how the world has a 2030 vision, okay? Well, Turkey has look at OG investors. Turkey had a 2023 vision, okay? 2023 vision. Remember, that's 7 years before 2030, okay? They built a massive airport. It's like one of the world's largest airports. They built a big canal. They built a big bridge and river system connecting both sides of that. They took over the Hagia Sophia, built a bunch of nuclear power plants, built an underwater tunnel underneath the Bosporus. So they've got a bridge over the water and then this tunnel under the water where you can drive now straight through to both sides of Turkey. They apparently started putting up smart cities. And they're claiming that Istanbul is going to be the smartest city in the world by 2029. That's the anniversary of John the Baptist ministry starting. And now they're bringing in Elon Musk to build plants in Turkey. Okay? Turkey has a lot going on. They are, I forget what it's called, the dark horse in the race. Turkey has the potential to have an amazing economy here, okay? Turkey has farming. Turkey has mining. Turkey has an auto industry. Turkey has, I don't know if they make their own planes, but I know they make their own helicopters. Machinery. To be a superpower, you need a machinery industry. And they make engines there, okay? You need a machinery industry. They have tourism, textiles, electronics, shipbuilding. They have amazing port status, okay? Iron, copper. They have a defense industry. They have a petroleum industry. They are projecting themselves into the world, but meanwhile, they are not blowing it on military expenditures. They have the second largest army in NATO next to the U.S., but they're not having military adventures. But they now have bases in Germany, Jamaica, Kuwait, Senegal, Cuba, Djibouti, Pakistan, the UAE, Ivory Coast, Gabon, Senegal, Chad. No, this can't be. I'm sorry. Turkey is now starting to form bases in the Horn of Africa, so that's Djibouti and Somalia. That's Azerbaijan, which is now crushing the Armenians, and now in Syria and Iraq. Notice this is the Antichrist territory, and now Libya. Remember, the Antichrist is going to take over Egypt, and it's going to say how Putin, Libya will be at his heels. In other words, they're submitted to him, it seems like. Some will translate it at his steps, others will say at his heels. Either they're submitted to him or he's getting ready to invade them, one of the two. Okay, but it looks like he is going to subdue this. Okay, well, Turkey has been positioning itself to do this, but what it has not been doing, it has not been getting involved in America's wars in the Middle East. It has stayed out of America's wars in the Middle East. It has stayed out of Afghanistan. It did not allow, well, I think it might have allowed some Americans to fly planes out of there for the Iraq invasion. But they've been generally pulling back from NATO in terms of helping their support for the war on terror, because they've been positioning themselves to be favorable towards the Arabs. Remember, these are not Arabs. These are Arabs, okay? Yes, the Arabs have conquered this once upon a time, but these are Moorish peoples. These are Chaldeans. These are Aramaeans. These are Farsi and Elamite peoples, okay? They're mostly Semites until you get up into here, but they're not Arabs. These are Arabs, okay? A lot of them are going to speak Arab, but they still speak Chaldean here. They still speak Aramaic here. And they still speak Farsi here. So don't think this is all Arabs just because your news tells you that, okay? So Turkey seems to be doing something similar in their Project 2023, and I think that's when your 7 years of plenty have ended. I know people are saying, oh, no, the stock market is shooting up. We're going into another 7 years of plenty. Look at this. So the Dow just took a massive spike under rumors that they're going to drop the federal interest rate. The stock market is as high as ever. I've just had a feeling that the stock market's going to get to around 40,000 points before it crashes hard. This is back in COVID. This is the 2008-2009 crash. The stock market has just been growing out of control. And some of this is population growth. A lot of it is ballooned. Okay, so there is definitely room for the stock market to take a major dive. We'll see what happens there, but we're heading into the black horse. We're heading into World War III, and Turkey is doing the smart thing, which is building up their internal economy, building up their military, and keeping their country walled off and staying out of everybody's military stuff. Okay. What I believe they're going to do is wait for everybody to exhaust themselves in World War III, and then they're going to break out. And they're going to break out and just take over everything, and that's where your Antichrist is going to come from. That's been my theory for years. But anyways, back to Joseph. That's kind of what Pharaoh's doing, but he's divinely inspired to do it. Remember, you've got the world supply chain falling apart because of the confusion of tongues. And it's going to hit Egypt too. Now, they're not telling you it's the Tower of Babel and this is what's causing it, but you have Joseph, a Hebrew, talking to Pharaoh, an Egyptian, here. And in the next chapter, you're going to have Joseph, a Hebrew, supposedly an Egyptian, talking to Hebrews and using an interpreter. Okay? That's how I know. We don't have they trained him in Egyptian. They were all speaking the same language. And then all of a sudden something happens. And next thing you know, you got an interpreter. Okay? So, he says, basically the Pharaoh's going to be like, what was this dream I had? This was crazy, go nuts. And Joseph's going to say, well, here's your dream. It means that you're going to have 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And you need to do this and this and this because I'm really good with math and accounting. And he pulls together how much stuff you're going to have to save so that you're going to have enough food to get through the famine, and you'll be all right. You know, it'll be more than all right. You'll be able to sell grain to all these people who have a famine. And so he sets up Egypt on a system. And by the time you have, remember, because you have a really good eternal economy in those first 7 years, you're going to have a lot of Egyptians taking out loans and stuff like that they can't pay. Okay? You're going to have a lot of Egyptians engaged in other forms of business because food is so cheap that they're buying their food and they're not growing their food. Same thing you have in America right now. You have a lot of people buying food. Once upon a time, it was common to have a garden and growing some of your own food at least. Okay? Nobody does that anymore. Okay? And so all these people are going to sell themselves into slavery to Pharaoh in order to feed themselves. And basically, Pharaoh is going to go from essentially owning all their stuff to them all being Pharaoh's servants. And this economy is going to essentially turn from a free market economy into a feudal system where Pharaoh controls everything. Okay? All these other Egyptians, because he saved his food and guarded his food and built up his military to make sure nobody could come take his food, they're all buying food for him to live because the economy is so bad. And he ends up basically running all of Egypt over Joseph's lifetime. Over the course of 7 years, he buys up everything. And it's basically one big feudal system now. And who's running it? The guy who knows how to run a household full of slaves, the guy who knows how to run a household full of prisoners, the guys who knows how to run his family household, which had thousands of people in it, is now running Egypt's household. He has been progressively moved up. This guy has management and leadership potential. Okay? He's very smart. And Joseph is going to invent the world's alphabet. If you guys have ever seen Patterns of Evidence, I very much recommend you watch that and learn about Joseph's creating the first alphabet. Remember, the Egyptians have hieroglyphs. The Babylonians have cuneiform. And Joseph is going to come up with something better than that. And he is going to come up with a Proto-Hebrew script. And it seems to be the basis for the phonetic alphabet. Okay? It's going to get copied essentially by the Arabs, the Aramaeans, the Phoenicians. But Joseph seems to be the OG. Okay? He seems to adapt something like a hieroglyphic system. But it's going to be symbols that represent sounds. It can represent words, but they also represent just sounds. And you're going to take because they're going to be the beginning of each word. So the word Ab is going to be Aleph and Bet. Aleph and Bet. And Aleph is actually like an olive branch. And Aleph is going to be A, and then B is going to be Bet. And Aleph and Bet is going to where we get the words alphabet. But Aleph Bet also means head of the house. Where does Joseph go? Wherever he goes, he ends up being the right hand to the head of the house. Aleph Bet, okay? And it's basically going to be a symbol. A B is a house. It's going to be like a symbol for a house. It's just going to be like a little square on its side. And Aleph is going to be like an olive branch, okay? And this is going to expand and expand, and it's eventually going to be Aleph Bet means alphabet, okay? And they're going to find really old versions of this on the rocks around Mount Sinai. And they're going to find in the Sinai Peninsula and in the rocks of Mount Sinai that the Jews were using this code, this script. And it predates the Phoenician alphabet and all these, but they all have basically the same consonant sounds. It's usually like 20-some consonant sounds, okay? And then they didn't have vowels at first, but the OG was made by Joseph, it looks like, okay? And so the Jews have been using written language this whole time they're in Egypt, okay? It starts with Joseph. Remember how Joseph is wherever he goes, okay? He's so good at management, and he's so trustworthy that whoever he works for doesn't pay attention to what he's doing, okay? And that's going to be the same thing with Pharaoh, okay? So he goes from running Potiphar's house to running the jail to now running the whole Egyptian government, okay? And Pharaoh is just sitting back living large. And the pharaohs are not paying attention to anything. And that's why when the new pharaohs take over who don't know Joseph, they're very intimidated of the Jews and they start to oppress them because the Jews have so much power because the pharaohs haven't been paying attention. Well, the Jews haven't done anything untrustworthy, but these guys don't know that. They haven't been paying attention. Now, this whole thing about the Hyksos, I don't buy this. I think the Hyksos are the Hebrews, and the Caphtorim are who the pharaohs come from. And basically those two run all of Egypt, okay? And the pharaohs who don't know Joseph, it doesn't look like it's another... Your secular theorists who are never going to cop to anything in the Bible, they're going to say, well, essentially it goes from these Semitic peoples ruling Egypt to these other people. I'm sorry, but Egypt has an advanced civilization on a major river system with allies all up and down that river system, and you're going to tell me some Arab raiders came in and took over. Bull crap, okay? The Arabs never get that strong to be able to do something like that until the Byzantine and the Byzantine and Sassanid empires wear themselves out fighting for centuries, and then the Arabs come in and do that. Okay, but you already have the Alexandrians who are almost rebelling against the Romans already for 100 years before the Arabs come in and take it over. Okay, so I don't buy the possibility that these nomads from the desert could come in and raid with their scimitars and their camels and take over an established civilization with guards and armies and like metallurgy and all this other stuff. No way. These Arabs are probably buying their weapons from the Egyptians if they have weapons. And there's no way the Egyptians are fighting wars against the Hittites, which are the other major kingdom. But somewhere along the lines, this mysterious Semitic people called the Hyksos, which nobody can really trace to anywhere but Egypt in Goshen, where the Hebrews are, came out of nowhere, and that's why the Jews had favor there. That's just stupid. The Bible tells you why the Jews had favor there. And so the Jews are the Hyksos, okay? And basically they're running everything. They're living in Goshen, which is rich, fertile land, and they basically are running their herds. They move in there with thousands of people. It's the 70 sons of Jacob who are the aristocracy of those thousands of people. But they move into Goshen, they take over Goshen, and they're running the government of all of Egypt, okay? So they are essentially the government administration, okay? They are the deep state, if you will. And they have developed their own language. Remember, we're in the generation that the Tower of Babel has happened. And these people immediately developed the first alphabet. Do you think they're smart? Yes, they are. Do you think they're organized? Yes, they are. Okay? They don't have enough military power to overrun Egypt once the pharaohs turn on them, because the pharaohs control all of Egypt. Okay? They have the whole Nile system now at their command. And when they want to oppress the Jews, they do it. Okay? But the Jews were running the government. Joseph is married to the daughter of the high priest. Okay, they have major clout in Egypt, and so Joseph he's going to be married to the high priest, and he's going to be running Pharaoh's grain system and deciding who they're going to sell to. And that's when he's going to come across his brothers again, and he's going to do this whole thing where he's going to pretend he's not him, and he's just going to speak through his interpreter like he doesn't speak Egypt, probably wearing Egyptian makeup and all that stuff. And his brothers are going to he's going to accuse him of being spies, and he's going to make him come get Benjamin, and they're like, no, and we're going to keep another brother until we get spies. And I think they keep Simeon. And Reuben says, do not sin against this child. And they take Simeon, remember he's one of the violent ones, and they bind him, and they lock him up until they bring Benjamin. And then they go back to their dad and they say, Dad, he's not going to let us until we bring Benjamin. His dad's like, I'm not giving up another son to you guys get my sons killed. And now you got Simeon. No, I've already lost 2 kids. No, I'm under judgment. And so Benjamin, he's not going to let go until they get to the point where they're out of food again. And they're like, we need more food, Dad. We need more food. And so they're going to get Benjamin. And they're going to go get Benjamin. And then they're going to get to a point where they're all in Egypt. And Judah, when he threatens to keep Benjamin, because Joseph's going to put the cup in there, and then Benjamin is going to get caught with a cup, and Joseph does it, so he's going to keep Benjamin to himself. Why is he doing it? What is Joseph's MO? Is his plan to reveal him to his brothers? Is his plan to protect Benjamin from his brothers? Because he knows that these guys would kill him and sell him into slavery? Probably, honestly. He's probably trying to protect his genetic brother. Remember, their mother's dead, and their father was duped into thinking he's dead, and their brother is sold into bondage. Okay? And he meets his brothers. And notice he says when he meets his brothers, he said he remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them and said unto them, you are spies. So he remembered that they were going to bow down to him, okay? And he calls them spies, and they said, no, we're 12 brethren. And he said the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not. Okay? So the implication is one is dead. So he knows these guys have convinced his father that he's dead, okay? He does not trust these people. He's going to get his brother away from them. so that he's going to rule over them and they don't do to his younger brother what they did to him. Okay? That's probably what he's thinking. He doesn't seem to want to kill him or anything like that, but he's not just playing a game. He seems to be legitimately trying to get Joseph away from them because his father wasn't smart enough to figure out what they did. Okay? And so he's protecting his brother. And so he gets Benjamin, and then he fakes it like Benjamin stole the thing, and his plan all along is to keep Benjamin from them. Okay? And so then he says, he gets him, and he says, "Is your father yet alive?" And he tells him to bring his brother down, and then he takes the brother. Remember, his mother dies in childbirth when he's pretty young, so his brother's significantly younger than him. His brother probably would have been like a little kid when he left, and now his brother is probably a young man. And this whole time, he is convincing these brothers that he's an Egyptian, and he has powers of divination, and he uses the wine cup for divination. So he's not letting them know anything about his dream skills, okay? Because that might detect that he's Joseph. And he takes him, and then he's going to say, "Have you a father or a brother?" And he says, "Yes, we have a father. He's an old man and a child of old age. A little one, and his brother is dead." And they finally admit what they did. No, I'm sorry. They've not yet admitted to Joseph what they did. Okay? So remember, these are evil people. They sold their own brother in slavery. They were going to kill him. Joseph is not like, oh, maybe they've changed by now. Okay? He's not assuming anything good about these guys. And so he gets Benjamin from him. And then he says, I'm going to keep him. And that's when Judah basically says, "Take me instead of him. I can't go back to my father after what happened with Joseph." So he can see in Judah like a genuine pain for how much they pain their father regarding their brother. So again, it's Judah doing all the talking. Now remember, Judah's lost 2 sons. Judah has been greatly humbled. Okay? Unlike his other brothers, who've just gotten away with what they did. Judah has been greatly humbled by God. And so he's basically saying, keep me instead of him, because it's going to kill our father if his son doesn't come back. Please keep me instead. Okay? He's offering to trade his life for Benjamin's. Okay? And that's where Judah senses repentance in him. Okay? So then he says, Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood with him, and he cried, "Cause every man to go out for me." Like, get all these guys out of here. And there stood with him no man, while Joseph made himself known to his brethren. Okay? So he finally makes himself known for him. He sees repentance in Judah. And that's why he finally makes himself known to him. And he says, "I am Joseph. Does my father yet live?" And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. They're terrified. Okay? He's already kidnapped one of their brothers. He's taken another one. He could have them all killed. They're terrified of this guy. And he's saying, "I'm Joseph. Come near to me, I pray you." And they came near, and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me thither, for God did send me before you to preserve your life." He's telling them, God saw the Tower of Babel coming. God saw this famine coming. God did all this to protect us. He did it. okay? Never mind that he used you and your wickedness as the instrument of where he gave me. This is like a huge, huge lesson for everybody about what's going on in the world, okay? You're going to have people that wrong you. You're going to have people that reject you. You're going to have people that push you away. You're going to have bosses that fire you. You're going to have family that mistreats you. You're going to have divorces. You're going to have people that betray you in business. All these different things are going to happen. And you always go back to whatever your situation is be faithful to God, be trustworthy in what you do, be honest in how you do your business, be honest in like if your wife is faithless, you remain faithful. Oh, she's cheating, now I'm cheating. Nope, we don't do that. We don't take vengeance into our own hand. We don't make it about getting our justice, because God might be doing something and turn their evil into good. Okay? And that's why we're called to bless those who curse us and pray for us, those who despitefully use us. Doesn't mean you can't be hurt. Doesn't mean you don't have anger. Okay? But move your mind away from that and focus on what God has put in front of you. What is he doing right now? I know somebody might have screwed you over, but what is God doing right now? Where has he led you? What's going on? Okay? It's a hard lesson to learn. But the point is you don't let other people's wickedness unto you turn you to wickedness out of a sense of injustice in God's hands, okay? God allowed that to happen for a reason. If you were deceived, God allowed you to be deceived for a reason, okay? That's something I had to deal with down here in Phoenix. It's like, why am I here? Why am I here in Phoenix? If it wasn't to go to this school because they lied, why am I here? So now I'm checking out churches and doing this and possibly considering staying here for some time. I don't know. Okay? I just know it wasn't to go to the seminary that I was going. That was my plan. That was my original reason to come down here. So we'll see what God does, okay? But God has blessed my YouTube channel. I had 100 subscribers when I moved down here. I've got over 500 now, even though I do long-winded 3-hour videos. So maybe God's doing something there, okay? So anyways, it says 2 years has the famine been in the land, and it's yet 5 years, okay? So notice now they're getting close to the middle of the tribulation when he reveals himself to them, okay? It's not the exact middle, but the point is it's in the midst of this 7-year tribulation that Joseph, who's a type of Christ, reveals himself to the house of Israel, okay? And then eventually his father's going to come in, okay? But it's in the first half that they're coming to faith. And then it says that God has sent me to preserve your posterity on the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. He's a type of Savior. He's a type of Christ. And he said, now it was that you sent me thither, but he said, now it was not you that sent me thither. In other words, you were the agents in your evil, but God was over it. Okay? And he made me a father to Pharaoh. Listen to this. He has made me a father to Pharaoh. Now remember, Jesus is called Everlasting Father, Son of God, right? He's both the Son of God and the Everlasting Father, okay? And Lord of all his house and ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Haste ye and go thee to my father and say, thus saith thy son Joseph, God has made me Lord of Egypt. Come down unto me and tarry not. And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen. Thou shalt be near to me and thy children and thy children's children, and thy flocks and thy herds and all those as. And I will nourish thee for these last 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all those country come into poverty. And behold your eyes and see the eyes of your brother Benjamin, and it is my mouth that speaks to you. And you shall tell the father of all my glory in Egypt, and that you have seen, and you shall bring in haste and bring my father hither. Okay? So he's telling him to come back with his father. And the fame was heard thereof in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come, and it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. So he knows Joseph was sold into slavery. Pharaoh knows this by now, okay? He's Pharaoh's right-hand man, okay? And now they're all there. And so he says, take your father and your household and come to me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat of the fat of the land. And Goshen is like prime real estate in Egypt. It's basically like some of the most fertile, well-watered land in all of Egypt. That's what they get. And he says, take your wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones, your wives, and your kids, and come. Okay? So they all have wives and kids. Again, Joseph's immediate household is up to grandchildren now, and there's 70 of them. Okay? And he said, also regard not your stuff, for the good of the land of Egypt is yours. In other words, leave your junk, just bring your people. We'll take care of you. And the children of Egypt did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way. And to all of them he gave each man changes of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. Cha-ching. That's a year's wages by any standard, and 5 changes of clothing. It was a lot back then. And to his father he sent after this matter 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with corn, bread, and meat for his father by the way. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said, see that they not fall out by the way. And they went up out of Egypt, came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father, and they told him, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed him not. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said unto them. And when he saw the wagons and Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph my son is alive, and I will go and see him before I die. So Jacob is going to be about 130 now. Okay? Joseph is going to be, I would guess he is probably somewhere around 60. That would be my guess. Because Jacob was 20 years. He has Joseph right before he leaves, and he's 40 when he goes there. He's 20 years later comes back. So I would assume Joseph is somewhere around. Actually, he's probably around 100. Or he's probably around 70 years old now. Okay, but he was probably older by the time he has kids. And it says Israel took his journey, and all he had, came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to God. And God spoke to Israel in the vision of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob, and he said, here I am. And he said, I am God, the God of your father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. So he's telling you, I am going to nestle you guys in the most powerful country on earth, so you can grow and flourish and not have any wars and become a powerful nation before I give you Canaan. Okay? Now, remember, God has just axed Nimrod's nation. Okay? Nimrod's nation was the superpower, the only superpower of the world. Okay? He is basically controlling Assyria and Babylon put together. All the way up into Turkey, all the way down there, and he's got a trade network that probably extends well beyond that. When his empire goes down, 2 empires primarily are going to rise in his place, and that's going to be the Hittites in western Turkey. Assyria is going to remain somewhat of a kingdom that's kind of defensible. It's not going to be an empire. The Amorites are going to come across from Canaan. Let's look at a map here. The Amorites are going to come across from Canaan and take over this area. And that's where you're going to get the second Babylonian kingdom, and that's where Kota Hammurabi and all that stuff's going to come from in cuneiform. Okay? The first one is going to be Akkad, and they're going to go up into here, and they're going to have Nineveh. And the second one is going to be the Amorites here, and they're allied with the Canaanites, and the Hittites are their cousin here. So the Canaanites are poised to become the next dominant world power, because they have the Hittites, they have the Amorites, they are cousins, and the third most powerful empire is going to be the Egyptians. Now the Ganges River civilization is getting powerful, but it's way over here. Okay, these are the main civilizations, and then you're going to have the Kushites that are going to grow up here, and because they're upstairs of Egypt, they don't have any major threat. They maintain trade here, and they're eventually going to get powerful and come down and take over Egypt, but that's going to be after Moses and these guys depart. Okay, that's going to be closer to the reign of, during the time of the judges and the reign of David, that they're going to do this. But meanwhile, these Canaanites, God knows these Canaanites are going to become super powerful all over here, and they're going to come here, and they're going to get to the point where they're a tit for tat as strong as Egypt. Okay, and so they're going to fight battles over here, and it's going to go back and forth. Okay, and God has moved Israel to Goshen, which is essentially, you see where Cairo is here? Goshen is going to be right around here. So it's going to be well watered, it's going to be green. This essentially turns into this Egypt turns into, most rivers just turn into one big mouth, but Egypt is actually going to flow down here to become a big, huge marsh with major rivers coming through it. And this just becomes all irrigated and stuff. And Joseph seems to be over this irrigation, okay? Joseph seems to be helping this grow into this very well-watered land, and Egypt is going to become the most powerful empire in the world. Okay, hands down, the single most powerful. Hittites are strong, the Second Babylonian Empire is strong, but Egypt is the most powerful. And he's going to nestle them right up here in the midst of it, and they're going to be the government administration. They're also going to take care of Pharaoh's own flocks and herds. So they're going to have a very prominent role in this government. And economically, they're going to keep growing. Remember, they already have these Shechemite servants. They already have the household of Isaac with them. And then they're going to start marrying into the Egyptians, because the Egyptians definitely want to give their daughters to this family, because this family is running the whole government. You want to be in a good position, you want to give your daughters to this family. Okay? And so what you're going to end up with is the wealthiest and most prominent Egyptians are going to be marrying into the house of Israel. And that means they're going to get smarter and better looking, and they're going to essentially have the gene pool going for them. Okay? And so they're going to be a very prominent people over here. And that is going to take them until, again, a new Pharaoh comes, and this is going to be after Joseph dies, and he's going to start turning on the Jews, okay? But that hasn't happened yet. So they're going to go into Egypt, and they're going to list all these sons. And if you go and you read the book of Numbers and Exodus and stuff like that, you're going to find these sons. They're going to be exactly 4 generations, okay? So you're going to see Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. So Levi has 3 sons. This is Moses' grandfather. They were not in Egypt 400 years. They were in Egypt around 210 years. Okay? Moses' grandfather is, I think Kohath is his grandfather. No, I think it is Merari. Okay? But we're gonna cover all this in Exodus. Okay? You see Judah has, remember the 3 sons who, the 2 that died, they're going to count them among the 70. Now, why are they counting them even though they're dead? Is because later on, you're going to find out that in Deuteronomy that God numbered the 70 nations according to the sons of Israel. This is really important, okay? The 70 nations are numbered according to the sons of Israel. Why? Because the 70 sons of Israel were all alive when the 70 nations are split, okay? So you have 70 nations of Gentiles and 70 sons of Israel, and there's a parallel between them. Why? Because God is projecting prophetically that he intends to save all the nations and bind them into Israel. That's why there's 70 sons, and that's why they're counting 2, even though that they're dead. Okay. So again, this is going to be in Deuteronomy before you figure this out, but you want to remember they're going to have these 70 sons probably around the same time that the Tower of Babel incident happens, and then the 70 nations are broken off, and you're going to have 70 Gentiles, 70 Jews. It's pretty cool. And so he breaks down all the 70 sons of Jacob. And then he says, he sent Judah before him to Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen, and they came in the land of Goshen. So notice, Joseph puts Judah in charge of leading the Jews. Okay? This is forecasting. Remember, you have Joseph as a type of Christ. He's also going to be the head of the Ephraim, which is where the house of northern Israel is, but he puts Judah in charge of the family. And he's the one he sees the repentance in. And so Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel to Goshen and presented himself unto him, and he fell on his neck and wept his neck a good while. And Israel said to Joseph, Now let me die, for I have seen thy face, for thou art yet alive. And Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say to him, My brother and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come to me. And these men are shepherds, for their trade has been to feed cattle, and they brought up their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, and say, What is your occupation? That they say, My servant's trade has been about cattle from their youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, that you shall dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. The Egyptians consider themselves clean, okay? The Egyptians are going to be metropolitan. The Egyptians are going to get into homosexuality. They're going to get into, basically they have a great river system, and so they can get most of their food by farming, and they scoff at shepherds, okay? They're going to be people who are largely vegetarian. They're going to be people who eat well, look good, basically walk around half naked all the time. And it's hot and sunny all the time. They got great tans, and they're going to look down on these grubby shepherds who are fully dressed and cover their bodies and hang around with these dirty, stinky animals. We eat cucumbers and leeks and fish and good food like that, okay? And of course, they're going to eat other food too, but the point is they look down on them as like a dirty trade. They also worship a bull. So what you probably have going on in Egypt is something similar that you have going on to Hindus, where they probably don't kill bulls. They probably use them to plow their fields and stuff like that, but they probably don't kill them. They probably worship them like the Hindus do. And so their god is going to be their primary deity. Remember, they develop a cult system, but they're going to develop this deity, and this is a counterfeit trinity. And you're going to have this deity that's ultimately going to come to form a sun disk with a serpent, because that's wisdom. And then this is going to be like God, okay? So you're going to have essentially God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, but it's a corruption because this serpent represents wisdom to them, okay? So they're not listening to the Holy Spirit, they're listening to Satan, and they have this corrupt trinity of bull, son, and serpent, okay? And remember, the Pythagorean, the word Trinity comes from Pythagoras, who seems to have gotten it from Egypt. Okay? So the Trinity didn't come from Christians. They did not invent that. That came from Pythagorean Egyptian mythology that's based around triangles and stuff. But they're going to have a lot of different gods, but this Apis bull is going to be a major thing. It says, is identified as the son of Hathor. Now let's see if Hathor is one of the people in the Table of Nations. Ludim, Animim, Lebahem, Naphtuim, Pathrusim, Kelsuhim. No, it doesn't look like it. The ancient Greeks believed that the Apis bull was the incarnation of Osiris, and according to the Jewish book of Jasher, Osiris is the guy who first elevated the pharaoh. Okay, so this seems to be a pretty old god motif, but remember, the Cushites, who are the older brothers to the Egyptians, are also related to the Indus Valley civilization. And what you probably have, because the bull is so central to them being able to plow fields and get away from herding and into agriculture, that's probably where bull worship comes in. I would imagine something like that. And it's supposed to represent God's strength, and obviously you've got the sun as kind of representing his light, and then the serpent kind of representing his spirit and wisdom. So it is, what it is an attempt to describe the true Godhead in a false way, okay? In using animals and serpents and symbols that God did not ordain, okay? So don't think that these people are just randomly worshiping other gods. It's going to evolve to being our king as the god and stuff like that. But it seems to start out as people trying to get the true God and trying to symbolize him in ways that God did not ordain. And that's why you have three different parts that are connected in somehow one, but they're three distinct things in this Trinity. Okay? Anyways, he is going to present Jacob to Pharaoh. He's going to be like, what's up? Pharaoh's going to be like, what's good, Jacob? And Jacob's going to be like, sup, Pharaoh? And he presents five of his brothers. He says, what is your occupation? He says, we're shepherds. He's like, good. Why don't you guys run my flocks and herds and stuff too? And then he's going to be like, here's Goshen. You can dwell there, and you can tend to my flocks and herds along with yours, and you'll have a good life here. And then he's going to meet Jacob, and Pharaoh is going to say, "How old are you?" Okay. Now remember, people are still living in this era to be upwards of 100, close to 150 years old. Okay. But Pharaoh is probably younger. This Pharaoh, son of Joseph, is probably, remember, the first guy who gets named Pharaoh seems to be in the days of Abraham. So this Pharaoh is probably a descendant of his. Okay, it becomes a title like Caesar or something like that, or whatever. So Jacob is probably much older than him. He says, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the years of my life, and I have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my father in the days of their pilgrimage." So they understand they're journeying in the earth temporarily, but him and his fathers lived to be 180. He's not even 140, he's 130. Okay, so he's 50 years shy of them. Okay, and he's saying, "Few and evil have been the days of my life." In other words, he's saying evil means calamitous. Okay, my life has been hard. Okay, he has not had the blessings of his fathers, he feels. And then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from Pharaoh. And Jacob placed Pharaoh and his brethren, gave him the possession of the land of Egypt, the best of the land, and the land of Ramses. Okay, the land of Ramesses. It's not called that. See, and this is what is going to happen with Egyptologists. Okay, when Egyptology first starts being a big thing, they have more honor for the Bible. And they're going to look at stuff like, oh, it's the land of Ramses. That must mean that Ramses, this has to be after Ramses. The Egyptians are going to have records. This is also going to be a problem that they have back in their day, okay? The Egyptians are going to have records that have multiple kings in them because Egypt wasn't a united kingdom until this time. And so these records that have multiple kings, just like the Jews are going to have kings and chronicles, and they're going to keep track of the lines of Israel and the lines of Judah, the Egyptians are going to keep track of multiple kingdoms in Egypt. And when they try to align that with biblical records back in the days of the Septuagint, they're going to assume that to stack all those Egyptian histories on top of each other in a straight chronology and then try to line it up with the Bible back then. You have people doing this in the church fathers. You also probably had people doing it among the Jews before that, because the Jews have been living in Alexandria since, Solomon marries an Alexandrian, so you probably have Jews there pretty early on, and then it's going to happen in a big way. They're going to start moving into Egypt under Jeremiah, and they're going to stay there, and they're going to be there during. It really starts happening during the Jewish apostasy. Some of them go to Egypt and build another temple. There's all kinds of stuff with the Jews mixing with Egypt. And so these attempts to align their history with the Jews' history eventually turns into the Septuagint, adding 1,800 years to it. And that's why most people try to trace the Egyptian historical record way back before the flood. Okay? It doesn't work out because of those reasons. But a lot of the stuff that they're going to use then to develop carbon dating and when they get their dates from seem to have somewhat to do with those records. Okay, so you're going to have some inaccuracy when you get beyond a certain point in time, which might be why like some of this stuff is saying 3500 BC. It might not be pre-flood. It actually might be post-flood, but they're messing up the history. Okay, so Joseph's going to nourish his father and his brothers and everyone in their family, and they're going to be there, and this famine's going to be bad. And then it says that Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought, and Joseph brought the money to Pharaoh's house. And when the money failed in the land of Egypt, so in other words, he's getting all of their gold and silver, okay? And in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread. Why should we die in their presence for them? The money, we're all out of money." So he gets all their money, and then he gets their cattle, okay? He gets their horses, their flocks, their herds, their asses, okay? And then he feeds them with bread in exchange for all their cattle. Then when that year ends, in the second year, he says, we have no money, we have no food, we have no cattle, what's left but our bodies? And they all become serfs. They become servants to Pharaoh, okay? So basically he says, "Wherefore shall we die in thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us our land for our bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and and give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. So in other words, Pharaoh is going to give them seed to replant their fields when it all dissipates because of the famine. And what's going on is really, remember, grain is in such abundance in the 7 years of plenty because they're doing very well. And then when the famine starts, they're all probably selling their grain because they're thinking it's going to keep coming. And they eventually get to a place where, shoot, we've shorted ourselves. And they eventually get to the point where the price of grain is too low, and they're not able to adequately pay their debts because the price of grain is too low, and it just steamrolls forward until they're all debt slaves of the Pharaoh. And then it says the only land and the land of priests, he said, only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned to them of Pharaoh, and did eat the portion which Pharaoh gave them. Remember, the Egyptian cult systems were designed by Pharaoh. Okay? And so probably these other gods of the Egyptians are probably, if I had to guess, Pharaoh and also the other, remember, Egypt has 7 sons. So they're probably designed around that and probably keep people become these different gods, okay? But it is a cult system that has been developed, and it is used to manipulate people to give money for their burials. That's the center point of it. And then it eventually becomes this god is over this and this god is over this, and it's just made up, okay? It seems to be the first real unified pantheon. You're going to have other gods that pop out of Hammurabi. I know we got Gilgamesh, but it seems to be you have these demigod people, which are like Nephilim, and then you have the God, the real God, and you have a spirit of wisdom. And so it seems like there's the gods and there's higher and lower gods. So it's almost like they perceive this as the God of heaven, or the gods of heaven, which is the Father, Son, and Spirit, and then the Nephilim are the lower gods. That's how they see it, or the angels and the Nephilim. Those are kind of your tier of gods and demigods. And it eventually evolves into these gods being named after famous heads of families and kings and stuff like that. And then they get consolidated into pantheons as people conquer. And it seems like that's what Egypt is going to do. They're going to conquer the people, and what begins as ancestor worship probably turns into their pantheon god system. Okay? And that's going to get copied by other peoples like the Greeks, and later Babylonians and stuff like that are going to copy that. And then it says, basically, it shall come to pass in the increase that you shall give a 5th part of Pharaoh, and a 4th part shall be your own. Okay? So they go from a free, open market economy with no real system of taxation. Remember, the money that Pharaoh is making is coming from burying their debt. That's how the Pharaoh gets powerful. Now he's got them paying 20% taxes. So I want you guys to see this. All of the people in the world are Pharaoh's slaves, and they end up with a flat tax of 20%. Okay? So if you guys think we're the freest country in the world, and I can tell you your average person making below average wages is paying upwards of 20% in taxes. Remember, that's what it was like when they went destitute and sold themselves into Pharaoh as slaves. Okay? So don't think we're so free right now. Okay? And they said, hast thou saved our lives? Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of the Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. I mean, if you do the math, in Europe, they're paying half or more of their wages in taxes. In China, they're paying half or more of their wages in taxes. In America, when you add up sales tax and gas tax and property tax and all the taxes, your average American's probably paying at least 30% in taxes. So I want you to see that most of the world pays more taxes than when all of the Egyptians sold themselves as slaves to Pharaoh, because they were famished and destitute and had nothing that they could pay him with. Okay? And he basically gives them their fields, and basically says you pay 20% taxes from now on. And that 20% taxes made Pharaoh very, very stinking rich. And that's why God is going to go back to his system of government that is 10% taxes. That's it. 10% taxes for the Levites. And the Levites are going to administer your priesthood, and they're going to administer the justice, essentially. And then they're going to gather the people for war and stuff like that. So they're the government, 10%. Okay? So he says, thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of the Lord. We will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law of the land of Egypt to this day that Pharaoh should have a fifth part, except the land of the priests, which became not Pharaoh's. So he is basically getting a 20% tax on the entire land. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen, and they had their possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land 17 years, and in his old age, when he was 147 years, he's going to die. And the time drew that he would die, and he called Joseph and said unto him, Now if I found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury not, I pray thee, in Egypt. But I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in my burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, Swear unto me, and he sware unto him, and Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. And came to pass after these things that he told Joseph, Behold, my father is sick, and he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And one told Jacob, he said, Behold, thy son Joseph comes to thee. And Israel strengthened himself and sat on the bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and I believe that's Bethel. And he said, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee, and make thee a multitude of people, and give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. So he's letting Jacob know, we got to go back. We can't stay here. Okay? And he said, And now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt before I came unto thee in Egypt, are mine, and Reuben and Simeon, and they shall be mine. So he's adopting Joseph's two sons. And he says, Thy issue which thou begettest after them shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren and their inheritance. So notice Joseph has other kids. Joseph's other kids are going to be his, but he's adopting his two kids. Okay? So there are officially 13 tribes in Israel. Most people don't realize there are not 12 tribes in Israel. There are 13. But the number 12 is always counted. First because the Levites are pulled out, and then later on because the Danites are rejected. Because that's where the Antichrist comes from. He says, As for me, when I came from Paddan, Rachel died by the land of Canaan in the way, while yet there was little way unto Ephrathah, and I buried her there in the way of Ephrathah, which is the same as Bethlehem. So Rachel is buried in Bethlehem. It becomes a very prominent city, and that's going to be where David's going to come from. And Israel beheld Joseph's son and said, Whose are these? And Joseph said unto his father, These are my sons, whom God has given me in this place. And he said, Bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near to him, and he kissed them, and he embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God has showed me also thy seed. And Joseph brought them from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them, and Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right hand, and brought them near to him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And so he says, and he blessed Joseph, and he said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, and God which feed me my day all the day long, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let thy name be named upon them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into the multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it to Ephraim's head, to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father. Notice he's calling Joseph my father. For this is the firstborn. Put the right hand on his head. Okay. So his father refused, and he said, I know it, son, I know it. He shall become a people, and he shall be great. But truly the younger brothers shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become the multitude of nations. Again, this idea of the younger becoming greater, you see it in Abel, you see it in Isaac, you see it in Jacob. Okay, now you're seeing it in Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, he is patterning Ephraim and Manasseh after him and Esau. Okay, it's also going to be in Jacob's Zerah and Perez. This younger serving, or the older serving the younger, is always about the household of Adam ultimately coming under Christ. Okay, It's going to be replete throughout Israel's history. They keep doing it again and again and again. It's going to be in their kings too. And Israel says to Joseph, "Behold, I die, and God shall be with you and bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow." So remember, Jacob apparently has fought wars. There's more stuff that goes on here, and you're going to find tidbits of it in the book of Chronicles, okay? You're going to find that now the book of Jasher is going to suggest that Jacob and his sons get into a war right after Shechem. I don't think that happens. But remember, Jacob is there 50 years in his father's house. And then this is going to be 20-some years after his father dies. So those, remember, Abraham had trained armies with him, and which means Isaac is going to inherit their descendants, which are going to be trained armies and servants and stuff like this, okay? He's got a mob. He's got a Bedouin mob here. And these guys are apparently going to get into it with the Amorites at some point in time, and he takes some land by force from the Amorites. Now, this is going to be before the Amorites take over from Nimrod and all them, but apparently they're getting into conflicts with the Amorites already. Remember, they go from being Abraham's allies to, in the days of Isaac or Jacob, starting to conflict with them, okay? And he's saying he has given him one portion above his brethren, okay? Well, what does this mean? He says, it means when he takes his 2 sons and makes them both tribes, he gives Jacob an additional portion, okay? So this Amorite portion is going to be, it's actually going to be a pretty prominent tribe in Israel. It's going to be, I believe it's the sons of Gilead. I'm going to jump to Chronicles really quick. Okay, so this is going to be this Hezron, the daughter of Machir, the father of Gilead. Some of this stuff is actually going to happen while the Jews are still in Egypt. So the Jews are not exclusively in Egypt in this time. They apparently, some of them expand out, and these are going to be Manassites. And there is going to be a union between this Hezron that would have been still while they're in Egypt, okay? And there's going to be a union between the Manassites, which are going to be these Gileadites, and you're going to find them becoming prominent in the book of Judges, and then the Judahites, okay? And these are going to be essentially David's cousins, his extended cousins. And this is where David is going to kind of gather most of his men who come to him, after he's on the outs with Saul. And these are going to be people that he hides among. But this daughter, I think this Machir, the father of Gilead, one of these people is going to be where Absalom comes from, and Machir might be the one. No, I'm sorry. I'm mistaken on this. It's in that region. I think the town is called Gesher, but it's a king that these people have somehow made treaties with, and so it looks like the tribe of Manasseh. Remember, this is going to be on the other side of the Jordan River. Are going to have somewhat of a foothold in this area of Gilead before they come into the Promised Land. You're going to have stuff that's going to come out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Ken Johnson covers a lot of that stuff about stuff that happens between them. But some of the sons of Israel are going to be back and forth, either traveling or for business, because they don't really become slaves in Egypt until they've been there over 100 years. And then you're going to have a war between the Hittites and Egypt, and then you're going to have some people blocked out. And there's actually one of the sons of Israel that gets blocked from his wife for years. I forget what it is. It might even be decades. where he's blocked from reconnecting his wife because of this war that's going on between the Egyptians and the Hittites. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that goes on before they become slaves, and during that time, you're going to have the Jews back and forth in conducting business, and at some point in time, Jacob is saying that there was a portion of land, so this is somewhere in that 50 years where he's living in Isaac's house, that he actually fights war with the Amorites and takes a chunk of land from them. And he's saying he's giving that chunk of land to Manasseh, essentially. And so that's why you're going to have the half tribe of Manasseh that's over on the other side of the Jordan, and which is where the Amorites were. And then you're going to have the other part of the tribe of Manasseh that's going to be on the side just south of their brothers near Ephraim. So in the lowlands below Ephraim. Okay, and so there's he's actually telling him, he's giving him a specific portion of land based on something he took in war. So we don't have this story in the Bible. Might be in the book of Jasher. If somebody wants to plug a link to all that in the comment section, that'd be cool. He calls his sons. He says, "Gather them together, and I'll tell you what will befall you in the last days." Okay, now this is where it's going to end. Okay, right before Jacob dies, he's going to prophesy over his brothers, and this is going to be very important in working out which comes forward in the history of Israel and related to the Messiah. So he's going to give them these. He's going to say, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency of my dignity. I am never going to let you forget that you slept with my concubine. You're unstable as water. You defiled it." And he's basically saying, you shall not excel. So what does that mean? It means you're not going to be the royal line. You're not going to be anything. Okay? You're still going to be a decent-sized tribe that it lives on the other river of Jordan, are mostly going to be cattle herdsmen, but they're not going to excel. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. Why? Because these are the ones who killed the entire town of Shechem. Okay? He says, "O my soul, come not into their secret unto their assembly." Now listen to this. "O my soul, come not into their secret unto their assembly, mine honor. Be not thou united." Wow. So notice he's calling himself Israel, shall rule as God. And he's saying, "Come not into their assembly, mine honor, be not united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall." Okay, in other words, they undermined a wall. Okay, what does that mean? These guys destroyed a town, and they undermined a wall, and they made things hard for him because of their anger. Okay, so he's saying, "My soul, come not into their secret, be not united to them." So he's saying Israel shall not be united to Levi or Simeon. And this is important because Simeon is going to basically be right in the middle of Judah, isolated, so they can't grow. But Levi becomes the priesthood. And Jacob has prophesied over them that his soul, in other words, Israel, will not be united to Levi. This is going to be messed up because Levi becomes the priesthood. What is he saying? He's saying this Levitical priesthood is doomed. This is not the thing. Okay? So you need to pay attention to what precedes this. Okay? The Levitical priesthood is not the thing. His soul, Israel, which is a type of Christ, is not going to be united to them. Okay? They are murderers to him. So it says, "Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel." Because he got these guys to circumcise themselves, to do the right thing after this guy had seduced his sister and then killed him. Okay? He sees in these people a capacity to rope in Gentiles. This is important. Make it look like they're going to join to them and then use that to murder them. That's what Levi is going to do in the last days with the mark of the beast. Okay? Levi is going to serve the Antichrist. Okay? He says, "I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." So that's how they get scattered. Simeon gets scattered among Judah. Levi becomes the priesthood, and they get scattered in Israel. In other words, he doesn't want them to become a powerful state. Okay? So the first three, you're out. Judah, thou art he whom thy brother shall praise. Remember, his name means praise. He's also the one who God has dealt with more harshly to get him to a place of repentance. And he turns that repentance into laying down his life for Benjamin's life. Okay? So he says, thy hand shall be in the neck of thy enemy, thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Joseph promotes him, and so does Jacob. You are going to be the ruler. Okay? He says, Judah is a lion's whelp. That's Christ, a young lion. Okay? From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. Okay? This is going to be in Hosea later on. He's going to prophesy that he's going to be like a young lion to the house of Israel and Jacob. He's going to tear and go away, okay? So he goes up. What is that? That's Christ returning to heaven. And then he says he stooped down. In other words, he's looking down, and you're going to see, this is going to be in the Psalms. It says the Lord stoops in heaven to observe what's in heaven and earth, okay? So in other words, he's condescending himself from eternity to see what's in heaven and in earth, okay? That's Christ coming down, okay? And then he says he couched as a lion. In other words, he's a lion getting ready to pounce, okay? A lion's going to sit up here on his kind of his high ground and watch over his pride, while the lionesses are going to go down below and they're going to do their hunting, and he's not really going to go down there unless there's the big threat, okay? He's just going to go down there and eat his portion and go back up. He just watches over things. So he says, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? Well, an old lion is not going to go down except to eat his portion of the meat, or if a young lion is getting out of order. Lion's trying to get uppity, trying to take over his pride, then he's going to take out that lion. Or if a foreign lion comes in, he's going to take out that lion, okay? So he's telling you that's what Jesus is going to be like. He's going to go down, and he's going to go back up, and then he's going to condescend and look down and see who's he's watching over the fold, okay? So he's in heaven watching down over us. And if a young lion comes up to try to take over his pride, which is going to be the Antichrist, he's going to come get him. Okay? This stuff, again, is all going to be in later prophecies. So you want to know these prophecies very well. Then he says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Okay? So the scepter is going to be the royal lineage of Judah, or the lawgiver from beneath his feet. That is going to be the priest. Notice it's between his feet. In other words, it's under his authority. So that's the priesthood. Okay, so that's the kingly line, and the priestly line will not diminish. Notice it says between his feet. The line of Zadok marries into the line of Judah. Okay, so between his feet represents his loins. Until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So he's telling you, he's prophesying that Judah in the lawgiver is, remember, that's the line of Moses, or it's Moses is the one who gets the law from the Lord, and then that's going to be upheld in the Levitical line. And when Shiloh comes, they're both going to be in him. Both the kingly line and the priestly line are going to be in Messiah, and they're going to cease after that. Okay? And then unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So you're going to find the kingly line cease. You're going to find after this, by the time you get to the end of the century after Jesus, you have Jude's descendants off, nobody's in Libya. You're going to have the Levitical priesthood dissolved. It's going to go away. And that's because Shiloh has come. Shiloh means tranquil. So it's like a word like peace. Okay? So until the peace comes, Jesus is the man who brings the peace. And then he says, binding his foal to a vine. Remember, Jesus says he's a vine. And it says his ass's colt to a choice vine. So Jesus is the vine and the choice vine. And he's going to ride on a foal, an ass's colt. Okay? He washed his garments, so that's going to be his first coming. That's going to be his first appearance. He washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. That's going to be his second coming. So see how he has his first coming and his second coming twice, okay? His eyes shall be red with wine, and I think that represents the violence of his second coming. And his teeth shall be white with milk, and I think that represents the pure speech of his first coming. Okay. And then so notice how much he says about Judah. This is all going to be in other prophecies, and it's going to lead up to the Messiah. So then he says, Zebulun will dwell as the haven of the seas. He shall be a haven for ships, and his border shall be unto Sidon. So they say that they cast lots. When they get into Joshua's day, they say they cast lots for territories. I don't think they cast lots for all the territories, because there's certain things that are appointed by Jacob. So Zebulun being in the border of Zidon, let's see where Zebulun ends up being. Zebulun does not end up where Judah says. They're supposed to be. Maybe they mix up in here because it says their border will be to Zidon. So I'm sorry. I think Asher's territory surrounds Zidon. So I think Zidon is there. And basically Asher's territory is going to extend up to what is now Lebanon, and it's going to surround that. So I guess it is. Okay. Tyre, see here's Tyre up here, and that's Asher's territory. And so Tyre is one of the Zidonite cities, but they're right here. So Zebulun is going to be on the border of them. But it talks about him having ports, and he doesn't. So maybe the Zebulunites mix with the Asherites, or maybe they once had ports. But Jacob apparently says he's going to dwell at the haven of the seas and have a haven of ships, and his port shall be to Zidon. So I don't know how he doesn't end up there. Issachar is a strong ass couching between two burdens. So Issachar is going to be right here, couched between two burdens. What are the two burdens? I would guess that the two burdens are going to be the tribe and the half-tribe of Manasseh, which are going to be on both sides of him. He saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant unto tribute. So I think Zebulun, I think Issachar is going to fall under the Canaanite dominion for a little bit, until they get deliberated by Jael and Deborah and Barak. I think that's what happens with them. But he basically goes down to a land that he sees as good. It's a low land, and he becomes a servant unto tribute. That's also going to be where Valley of Megiddo is going to be right around this area, where the enemies are going to come in and subjugate them from there. So then it gets to Dan. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. So most people say, well, that's fulfilled in Samson. Kind of. But notice he says, as one of the tribes of Israel. This is different, because if you go through the book of Judges, there's judges taken from, I think, every single tribe in the book of Judges. Maybe one doesn't have them, but I'm pretty sure every single tribe has at least one judge. So the fact that he says Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel seems distinct. The fact that he says as one of the tribes of Israel means he's not one of the tribes of Israel. Okay? So he is prophesying that Dan is going to be kicked out of Israel. And this is going to happen. We're going to find that in the book of Chronicles. There is no genealogy of Dan that happens. And what seems to happen is about half the Danites sail away in the days of the judges. And it looks like they start joining the sea peoples and doing sea raiding and stuff like that. And they're going to spread around the Mediterranean from there. And then Samson, this is my theory, is that Samson, in that 20 years between his first wife and Delilah, he goes and joins them, and he helps overthrow the Egyptians or the Captorim or whoever's running Crete from Egypt. And then he helps the Greeks establish the Peloponnesian League, which is basically going to be a league that is essentially going to lead to the Greeks running trade in the Mediterranean. And he is going to looks like he's going to father the Spartans and the Argives, which are going to destroy Troy like a generation later. Okay, that's what looks like it happens. Okay, now the rest of the Danites, you're going to find the Danites when you get to David's army. They're going to have about half as many people as the army that they have when they go into Israel, which means this is what's left of the Danites. And those Danites, after David and Solomon's kingdom, when it gets to civil war between Rehoboam and Judah, when the kingdom splits and they start to get in civil war, the Danites don't want any part in it. And the Danites, a lot of them are going to migrate to Ethiopia. And they're going to start a serpent cult there. That's where you're going to have a serpent cult. And remember, you have people worshiping the brazen serpent later on, which you're going to find. And that probably is the Danites who do that, because the Danites are also going to start a cult with Moses' grandson very early on when they go into the book of Judges, and that's going to be the group that moves up to the city of Dan and starts to filter in to the Sidonians. Well, my theory would be that you're sitting at the nexus. You already have connections with Greeks and Egyptians, and now they're sitting at the nexus of the passage between Babylon and Tyre. And my guess would be that they have been mixing cults and religions, and most of your Egyptian mythologies and your Greek philosophies are going to be, and including your mystery cults, I'm going to say your monastics and your Illuminatis and your Freemasons and most of the stuff, probably originates with Dan. That would be my thought. He says Dan will be a serpent in the way. Remember, they start a serpent cult, and it's probably them that starts the cult of worshiping the brazen serpent that Moses had in the wilderness, an adder in the path. So this is not good. It bites the horse's heel, that its rider shall fall backwards. The horse, I believe, is the white horse, which is going to be the spirit of apostasy. So it's the spirit of Antichrist preceding the actual figure of the Antichrist. Just like you have the prophets leading up to Christ and all these four types, you're going to have this spirit of Antichrist that's leading up to the Antichrist. And Dan seems to be involved with that. And that which I think is Gnosticism and Freemasonry and all that stuff. Okay? And then it says it's going to cause its rider to fall backwards. Well, when you get into Freemasonry and Gnosticism, which have a Jewish component from the beginning, okay? The earliest Gnosticism, the Sethius, the Canaanite Gnostics, all this stuff, is mixtures of Judaism and Egyptian mysteries, it seems. Later Gnosticism, Freemasonry, is going to be mixtures of Judaism and Greek philosophy and Swedenborgianism and stuff like that. And that's going to be going back to the Egyptian mysteries. But it always has that Jewish component to it, okay? So the OG is going to be Judaism in Solomon's temple. And the Freemasons, all of them worship Solomon's temple, okay? This falling backwards is only going to be used one other time in the Bible, and that's in Isaiah 28, and it's talking about how the Jews fall backwards to the law rather than move forward with Christ, okay? And this falling backwards is the great apostasy. So he's basically telling you that the Jews are going to be led by the Danites to, it's basically that the white horse, which is going to be the apostate religion, is going to fall back into Judaism, okay? But remember, that common link has been in all of them, and it looks like the Danites are probably at the fountainhead of it. And so then he says after that, I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. So this is the final second coming. Remember, it's the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it, okay? So he is prophesying the time of Jacob's trouble and the Danites as the where the Antichrist comes from. Your early church fathers knew this. If you read Hippolytus of Rome or Ephraim the Syrian, Ephraim the Syrian is going to get his stuff from Hippolytus of Rome, but read Hippolytus of Rome's on Christ and Antichrist, and he's going to give you an expose on this. They know the Danites are going to come. They know they're going to come from Assyria, and they're going to take over Israel and pounce on Israel like a young lion, and then Christ is going to defeat them. That's what they know. Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. I do not know what that means. I have no idea. Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. So these are going to be like royal delicatessen treats. Okay. Probably this is the region where Jesus is giving his "I am the bread that came from heaven." Okay. That's what I guess the royal dainties are going to be. His bread shall be fat. They're probably these are going to be rich fields in the valley of Megiddo area, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Asher ends up being all up and down the coastland, which was prophesied to Zebulun. So I'm guessing it's going to be a mix of those two. That's what my guess would be. And Zebulun's actually going to disappear from the Chronicles as well. So probably the Zebulunites mixed with the Asherites, and they probably have port cities there. Naphtali is a hind let loose that giveth goodly words. Again, Naphtali is going to be a hind is going to be my beloved in the Song of Solomon, which is a type of Christ, and he is going to do the majority of his preaching in the land of Naphtali. That's going to be prophesied in Isaiah 9 that says Naphtali. There's another one. I forget what it is, but it's primarily the land of Naphtali, where the sun rises upon them, and you who dwell in darkness have seen a great light. That's where the majority of Christ doing his preaching is. So I really don't know what Gad is. The troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. I have no idea. This probably has to do with Gad being, let's see where Gad is. Okay, so Gad is going to be one of the first ones who overcome. He's going to be one of the first ones that are overcome when Israel starts to go into captivity. So that's probably that. It also is going to be the land where the people in the end give bread and water to the Jews who are fleeing. So they're going to flee Jerusalem. No, I take that back. And they're going to go down here to Basra, but they're going to come across here first. So yeah, that is Gad, I guess. So they're going to be the ones who prevent them with water who fled, or at least it's going to be coming from there. But it isn't specified that it's the Gadites who are doing it, but they're in that way. So I don't know if that's going to be part of it. I'm not sure. I don't really know. I'm just speculating. So Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a bough by the well, whose branches run over the wall. Okay, this is the Christ type too. So he's a fruitful bough. Remember, Jesus is a choice vine. He's a fruitful bough. Okay, by a well. Remember, Jesus is the one who out of him come fountains of everlasting life, and his branches run over the wall. Jesus's vine is going to extend to include the Gentiles too, so it's going to go over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hate him. Remember, the Antichrist is the Antichrists are archers. So you're going to have Esau and Ishmael, which are both bowmen. Okay, and then the Antichrist is going to be the white horse with a bow, and he's going to be designed after Nimrod the hunter, or basically the archer type, who is going to be the antithesis to the shepherd type. Okay, so the archers have sorely grieved him. The Antichrists have shot at him and hated him. Okay, the Antichrists are trying to corrupt Joseph, and Joseph is going to be in the line of Jesus too. Okay, so Joseph's descendants is actually Ahab. Ahab is going to be in the line of Jesus, because Ahab's daughter is going to marry into the line of Judah, and then her daughter Athaliah is going to try to kill the whole house of David, but one of her grandchildren is going to survive, and it's one of her grandchildren that survive, and it's that grandchild that goes on to be Israel. And so therefore Joseph's line is going to stay in the line of Jesus. And then it says, but his bow abode in strength, the arms of his hand were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. So notice he's the stone of Israel, the shepherd. This is Joseph, the stone of Israel. He's the rock of offense. And the bow of strength. Now Jesus is going to shoot bow an arrow of lightning in the last days. This is going to be in Zechariah. He's going to shoot a bolt of lightning at the Antichrist and kill him. Okay? So you see a lot of Christ typology in Joseph, a lot of Christ typology in Judah, and then Antichrist typology in Dan. Then it says, even by the God of the Father who shall help thee, and by the Almighty who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast of the womb. Notice this is all about Joseph, okay? The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. So notice he's going to say Joseph, and this looks like a Hindiatus, but who's the other one who's separate from his brethren? It's Jesus, okay? So Joseph is the type of Christ. Then we're going to have Benjamin shall be raven as a wolf. Okay, what is going on? Raven means to ravage or to tear up, like a wolf coming in a flock and tearing it apart. That is Paul. Paul ravages the church. Okay, in the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Okay, now what's going on? Well, Paul's going to have a conversion. Okay. In the morning, he's going to devour the prey. In the beginning of Paul's ministry, he is ravaging the church. In the latter part of Paul's ministry, he is dividing the spoil. What is he doing? He is spoiling Satan's kingdom. Okay? So Benjamin is fulfilled in Paul. It's King Saul comes from Benjamin too, and he is going to be kind of a conqueror, but this is really about Paul. And then it says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and it is that their father spake unto them and blessed them, everyone according to his blessing, and he blessed them. And he charged them, and he said, I am to be gathered unto my people, buried with my fathers, in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for a possession, for a burial place. And they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Abraham and Sarah's wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife, and there I buried Leah. The purchase of the field and of the cave that is therein was from the children of Heth. So he probably buried Leah before he went to Egypt. Doesn't say when she dies. And it says, when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet in his bed and yielded up the ghost and was gathered there unto his feet. So Jacob has other stuff going on, like a war and stuff like that, and burying Leah, that's not really recorded, but he just talks about it, okay? So it says, Joseph fell on his father's face and wept and kissed him, and he commanded the servants and the physicians to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel, okay? Israel probably was not embalming before this. And 40 days were fulfilled for him, for they are fulfilled in the days which are embalmed, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. So 70 days the Egyptians mourned for Israel. You see how you have these? Remember, if you understand that 70 represents the 70 nations, you're going to see this typology again and again. These Gentile Egyptians mourn for Israel 70 days. Okay, 40 days are fulfilled for him, and you're going to have this type. Okay, you're going to have 40, 400, 4,000. That is going to represent the time from Adam to Christ. When you start having regeneration, okay? And so it's also how long the Egyptians are going to spend embalming, okay? And when the days of mourning are past, Joseph spake to the house of Pharaoh, saying, if I have found grace in your eyes, speak, I pray you, for the ears of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, lo, I die in my grave which I have digged for me in the land of Canaan, thou shalt bury me. Now therefore let me go up, I pray, and bury my father, and I will come again. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury thy father according to as he made thee swear. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the servants of the house of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and the elders of the land of Egypt, and the house of Joseph, and his brethren, and his father's house, all their little ones, and their flocks, and their herds, and they left the land of Goshen. So this is pretty amazing. Like, here's Jacob, this shepherd, and he's not a poor guy, remember. He's a pretty significant tribal leader, but like the royal house of Egypt that abhors shepherds, this is their culture. They're going to all go up and mourn the burial of this Israel, who's a type of Christ, who, when he's buried in the land of Egypt, and it's the elders of the Pharaoh's house, okay? Joseph went up, and all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and the elders of the land of Egypt, okay? The aristocracy of Egypt goes up with him, okay? So understand how well connected the Jews are in Egypt in the beginning, okay? They went up with him, both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. So where is Machpelah? Machpelah is right below Hebron. It's in the center of Judah. So imagine this host from Egypt going up here. This is a big deal. These Canaanites are going to see this and be like, that must have been a great dude. The host of Egypt is going up. The whole aristocracy of Egypt is going up to this guy's funeral, okay, when he's finally buried. It's a big deal. And it says, they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and there they mourned with a very great and sore lamentation, and he made a mourning with his father 7 days. So he's a 7-day mourning. I don't know what this threshing floor of Atad is. Atad means pierce or make fast, a thorn tree, a bramble, a thorn. So they mourn him in a place that means a thorn tree or a bramble, which is interesting. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the floor of the Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians, wherefore it was called Abel Mizraim. Remember, Abel means mourning. Mizraim, Egypt's mourning, which is beyond the Jordan. So the Canaanites actually named it after the Egyptians' mourning for Jacob there. And his sons did according to as he commanded him. For his sons carried him into the land of Canaan and buried him in the field of Machpelah, which Abraham bought the field from Ephron the Hittite before Mamre. And Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brethren, and all went up with him to bury his father after they had buried his father. And when Joseph's brethren saw that his father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil that they've done to him. So remember, think of like how Esau was going to wait till his father was dead and then get revenge on Jacob. Well, that's what they think Joseph's going to do. And they sent a messenger to Joseph, saying, thy father did command before he died, saying, you shall say to Joseph, forgive, I pray thee, now the trespass of thy brethren and their sin, and they did unto thee evil. And now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of God thy father, the God of thy father. And Joseph went with him, and they spake to him. And his brethren went and fell down on their face, and they said, behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said to them, fear not, am I in the place of God? Okay. So there they are, finally. Remember, it was the whole household bowing before him. Now it's the 11 brothers bowing before him, okay? And he said, fear not, am I in the place of God? But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. So God has promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph recognizes the bigger picture beyond himself and his brother's evil. And he says, now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly to them. In other words, I'm still the power of Egypt. Remember, this is just 17 years later. Joseph is going to rule Egypt for probably another 50 plus years. Okay? He dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. Okay? So he's probably not another 30, 40 years is probably how long he's going to rule Egypt, okay? But his brothers, they're all going to live to be in this ballpark of, 100 to 120. This is when people start, their ages start to diminish down to peak human ages now, okay? Joseph saw Ephraim's children in the third generation. So Joseph is actually going to live to see Ephraim's third generation, great grandchildren. Joseph's going to be alive when the children that come out of Egypt. Now remember, Moses is 80 by the time they come out of Egypt. They're there a total of 210 years, okay? So it would have been possible for Levi to have been actually alive at the birth of Moses if he's living to be 110 years. He's got kids by the time they go in there. So let's say he's a man who's going to be like 70 with his kids. He's going to live to be another 40 years. I don't know if that's going to work. Joseph is going to basically start having kids. It's probably in the ballpark of when he's like 40s maybe. And apparently you're going to have, at least the third generation is going to have babies. So Ephraim's children of the third generation. So that's his great-great-grandchildren he's going to live. And the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. So Machir, remember, he's going to be, that's that Gilead guy, okay? These guys are a big deal later on in Israel's history. And Joseph's going to be an old man by the time they die. Or they're going to be born by the time Joseph is an old man. And then he says unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land, which he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from hence. And Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Okay? Now this is important. He's put in a coffin in Egypt. And if you go watch this Patterns of Evidence, they find the tomb where he was. He was at this tomb. It was like this miniature pyramid that was in Goshen, where you have this guy who looks like a Hebrew. He's skin toned like a Hebrew, and he's got a coat of many colors on. And there he is. And it was where they kept Joseph's tomb. It's right smack in the middle of Goshen, okay? And that's it. So the generations of Jacob kind of end with the death of Joseph. Joseph doesn't get his own generation story because he's part of Jacob's story. That's why you have Jacob being buried and him dying in the same chapter. Okay, that's where the ancestry of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob go. Okay, now it's the nation of Israel coming out. And so this is really the origin story of the nation of Israel in the context of a now dispersed Gentile people. And you have, at the same time, if you get all your history lined up, you have the 70 Gentile nations and the 70 tribes of Israel. And the story of the world is going to be largely a contest between these two. Okay? And what it's going to turn into is them being united in Christ. So, that is the end of the book of Genesis. Next one, we're going to go into the book of Exodus. And like I said, I'm going to try to pop like one of these a week. And we'll get into that typology. We're going to go through Leviticus and Numbers. There's tons of typology and stuff you need to get out of that. Then after that, we're going to mosey through Judges and stuff like that. But before we go into Exodus, I'm going to do the book of Job with you guys. Because the book of Job probably took place around the time that Joseph goes into Egypt. So that's why I'm going to do it next. Okay? So I hope you guys are blessed by this. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.